A young guy named Fujisaki Yuto stood on a busy street, hemmed in by people wrapped in warm clothes, and the whole scene felt cold on his soul because he was 20, still chasing his dream of getting into an educational institution for 2 long years with a gloomy face and a scarf cinched tight around his neck. Yuto suddenly stood alone, clutching his head like it was proof he'd failed again. Then he looked up and found himself staring at the glass doors, where a bright, cheerful sign with a logo sat above the entrance. Yuto strode into the store with his head still in his hands, then yanked his glasses into place and muttered that he probably hadn't pushed hard enough next year. He'd pass everything. Yuto snaps his head up and spots an armed man loitering at the cash register, yelling threats at the girl to make the seller hand over the money. This is a robbery. Sweat broke out on Yuto's face and panic screamed through him because this dude really looked like a robber. A man wearing a medical mask barked for the cashier to hand over the money. Yuto stayed on the sidelines, watching every move like his life depended on it. A knife clenched in his fist. The man erupted in furious shouting, demanding why the girl froze and didn't see him while she strained in panic, pressing through her fear as fresh tears spilled down her face. A man clutched a knife in both hands, snarling straight ahead. Then Yuto lunged in with a mop and swung hard at the thief. The thief yelped, his knife clattering to the ground as pain hit, and tears burst from his eyes. The thief jerked back in pain, and before he could react, the cashier girl snatched a huge spoon from the display and hurled it down in front of her. Her eyes shut tight as tears spilled and ran. The girl hurls her huge spoon. Wham! It smacks the thief straight in the face, and the second it lands, Yuto surges in and drives another hit into the thief's back. His eyes roll as agony takes over. The thief crumpled to the floor, his knife left beside him, while Yuto and the girl froze in place. There was even a snapped mop sprawled on the ground next to him. Yuto was drenched in sweat, wheezing for air. Then he snapped his head up and stared at the girl behind the counter, still, unmoving. After a bit, the girl's face lit up into a smile, sweat pouring down her cheeks as she thanked Yuto for helping her. A wild, brilliant light flared in Yuto's eyes. Then the cashier girl started to blur and fade away, and slowly everything went dark in his gaze. Yuto jolted awake and snapped his eyes open alone. No one in sight. He stared up at the sky, totally lost, thinking, did I just stumble into paradise? Yuto found himself trapped inside a tiny floating cage in the sky. And just as a man stood behind him, Yuto snapped around with a sharp turn. A bald man stood behind Yuto, grinning. At first then he erupted, yelling that Yuto had finally arrived, only to stop and blurt out a quick apology first. Yuto fidgeted with his glasses, then told the man he just didn't get it. Why on earth he was apologizing right now, while the guy stood there, slightly hunched, staring him down. He shut his eyes, bowed his head, and said he'd cursed all 3 of them, then promised it was as good as death. Yuto stared at the man in shock, his hands hanging low at his sides, and he struggled to get the words out like he couldn't believe he didn't know who this guy was. He snapped his head up and started claiming, I'm the one they call a demigod. And right there in that border world, one step from paradise, his grand plan just wouldn't go through. More floating islands hung overhead, and the man kept marching on in those leggings, while Yuto stared at him like his life depended on it. The man stormed off from Yuto, huffing out a heavy breath as he muttered, I'm so sorry this happened. Yuto's voice snapped into loud shouting, What am I supposed to do now? And as the man walked away, he shot Yuto a grim look over his shoulder. The man leaned in, smiled at Yuto, and promised he'd pour his power into Yuto's rebirth, while deep wrinkles etched his face like years of secrets. The man stared Yuto down and warned him that he couldn't ever send him back to his world. Yuto would be stuck in a realm ruled by another man, but that controller's power wasn't limitless, and as the truth sank in, Yuto listened in pure panic. Yuto leaned forward and asked what world he'd step into next, and the man swung his arms wide, showing a witch, an archer, and a whole crew behind him. Maju-chin declared that Yuto would be thrown straight into the fantasy realm, the land of swords and magic. Yuto couldn't stop imagining terrifying monsters when that mysterious stranger warned him that this world is packed with magical creatures and brutal, dangerous places. The mystery man snapped his gaze to Yuto, and even though he couldn't do everything, He was still about to hand Yuto special skills, while his clothes whipped and shifted as the tailwind tore through them. The man whipped around to face Yuto, and Yuto clenched his fists as he blurted that he had a few questions could he ask. The man nodded right away and said yes. The man and Yuto started debating what kind of body Yuto would be reborn into someone ordinary. Sure, with magic, but only certain kinds. The man stroked his chin like he was calculating fate, and Yuto stared back in panic, afraid of what he might hear next. The man raised one finger, and boom! Symbols burst into view beside him with a grin. He declared the 4 basics of magic: fire, water, wind, and earth, along with the powerful combined spells. The man snapped his finger at Yuto and bragged he could expose his status, so Yuto shot his hand up, eyes wide with panic. Yuto dipped his hands down and echoed the man's words about the status then. After a beat, a table swung open right in front of him. The thing didn't feel like life at all. It felt like a trap, and Yuto froze in pure terror. A table slammed open in front of Yuto, and nearly every box read 0, while the guy promised him that this was the only way Yuto could finally dig into what he could do. The man hung back behind Yuto, scratched his chin with a smug little grin, and told him he already knew Yuto's rank, like he hadn't even handed him a thing yet. Yuto blinked in shock at the guy standing right beside him. The man thrust his hand toward Yuto and warned him they had barely any time left. Then he demanded to know what kind of power Yuto wanted to seize for himself. Yuto stared back, lost in deep thought. Yuto clenched a fist, slammed the other hand to his chest, and yelled that he wanted a talent so perfect the rewards would match his grind. And in that moment, the sky around him loomed like it had clouds drifting right above his head. The man's face twisted in a frown as he stared at Yuto, shocked. Then he warned that this skill wouldn't be easy at all. Yuto just stood there, unmoving, staring right back. Yuto didn't even move. He just erupted into shouting that this skill might sound simple, but with Yuto's insane luck, even if the level climbs, there's a real chance the stats won't rise one bit. Yuto faced the man, dropped his hands to his sides, and the guy stroked his chin, staring off like he was judging everything. Then he scooped Yuto up and declared, "I've got it," and promised to hand him the skill of innate talent. Yuto and that man offered 2 people the exact same stack of levels. Then the man grinned and said, "You'll need way more EXP to level up, and you'll level 3 times faster than everyone else." Then the crew pulls in 2 more people, and the guy keeps going, breaking down Yuto's ability like it's got secrets. Because as the level rises, every power gets 1, something a normal person simply can't do. Yuto's face flushed hot as he erupted in a shout, claiming he could climb way faster than everyone else. Like, if that was true, then he was basically daring them to hand him the power, and right as he said it, his eyes started glowing in a way they never had before. His eyes widened, and a strange symbol shimmered across his pupil. Then he leaned in and told Yuto, "Just like me, I'm handing you clairvoyance. With it, you can read people and objects, sense magic in the air, and more." Yuto finally steadied himself, stared that man down, and asked, "All right, since a demigod is involved, what happens to you now?" Above him, a sky of pale clouds drifted around Yuto. The man faced Yuto and declared, "I've decided to reborn you, Yuto." And the moment he said it, it was clear his own life was racing toward its end. Yuto just listened as the man bragged that his doppelgangers would handle the other 2 people, but then the truth hit. They weren't the real deal, so they only had half the power. The man grabbed Yuto's shoulders and kept insisting that the other 2 would only get a tiny slice of strength. The man gripped Yuto's shoulders, grinned, and said he trusted his doppelgangers because time was running out. Then a surge of bright light erupted around them, while Yuto didn't blink, keeping his eyes locked on the man. On the 2nd floor, one house glowed with light, and a man clutched a bewitched kid to his chest, while the child sobbed like crazy. Then a table materialized right beside him, revealing a reborn UTO. This world knew his name as Mars Bryant. Mars sat in a tight cut with barely any hair, then started crawling, and suddenly blonde strands sprouted on his head as time slammed forward. He matured, rose to his feet, and eventually unlocked clairvoyance. Mars strolled around grinning, soaking up the world as his mana surged from 0 straight to max, studying flowers, trees, and even everyday household stuff. Everything marked good. Blonde Mars sprinted in circles around a wooden table as 2 adults and a child sat tight, with cutlery and a breadbasket right in front of them. Meanwhile, In the room, a huge stone stove loomed with jugs stacked nearby. Bryant gripped a loaf of bread and smiled, saying Mars was more than happy to help. Then Mars snapped his clairvoyance on, because Zeke was the kind of man with a sword in hand, earth magic in his blood, and skills so sharp they felt unfair. Maria Bryant, laughing as she kneaded bread in her hands, shot Ike a smile, and you could feel it lift his mood, while she gripped her sword and commanded water magic. I.E. Bryant, dark-haired and hungry, dug into bread, grinned, and said Mars was insanely amazing, then immediately showed off. He swung a sword and spear like they were nothing, and even mastered fire magic, while a plate of food and a wooden cup sat right in front of him. Mars, the blonde kid, plopped onto a tiny chair, while one of his parents dropped a ball of food into his hands. He clenched his fists, grinned like he'd just been handed power, and a table with its own special features materialized right beside him. Mars lay sprawled in bed, mouth hanging open, dead asleep because in his mind, he'd burned every last drop of mana, so all he could do was crash and rest. Mars was still sprawled on the bed, but sleep was gone. He was wide awake now, dragging his finger across the table like he was studying it. And he fully believed that after that nap, his magic power had surged back stronger than ever. The table's details vanished, and Mars shot his hand up to study it, like he could already feel magic getting closer. Above him, the wooden floors and the house's roof loomed. Mars kept his hand raised, then grinned and blared, "Thunder!" his voice and eyes blazing with pure, unstoppable confidence. After that, the world went dead silent. Mars kept his hand up, then a grin spread across his face as he thought he finally had it figured out. Until the magic simply quit on him. Mars stayed sprawled on the bed, folded his arms and legs tight, shut his eyes, and told himself he had to learn magic like right now. By candlelight, Mars sat at the table with his parents and his brother, watching everyone else dig into their food, while Mars stayed still until a smile crept across his face and he called out to his parents. The table was set with plates and mugs, plus a breadbasket waiting. Mars's parents stared at him in terror after he bragged he could explain how magic works, while his brother just glanced over and kept right on chewing his bread roll. Maria scooted toward Mars, forcing a shaky smile as she started. "Why are you asking Yuto stuff like that?" Mars lit up and told her that if he had talent, he was dying to chase it right away. Maria just kept grinning nervously. Mars's face flushed red as a grin snapped onto it, and he told Maria she could teach him healing magic while Utah's blonde hair stuck out every which way. Maria snapped her hand to her face, forced out a nervous smile, and blurted that she still couldn't figure out why Mars needed healing magic. Her hair was perfectly styled, and a dark ribbon sat tight around her neck. Mars's parents shot up from their chairs with wide-eyed shock when Mars said he dreamed of healing the wounds of Mom and Dad. Maria snapped her head side to side and hissed to Zeke that they had to test if Mars could use his magic. Figuring out his powers first was the smartest move. The adults turned their eyes away while they talked. Zeke clasped his hands and stared at the floor. Then Maria said, "Zeke, we need to talk about something big," and told the guys to head to bed. The kids leaned in, listened like hawks, and obeyed every word. Ike and Mars were outside. Then Mars grinned and started eating his own parents, like it was nothing. And Zeke snapped, saying that right after yesterday's talk, he and his mom decided to teach the kids magic. Zeke faced the guys with his hands planted on his belt, and he demanded that Mars make the first promise, while Maria stood right behind him, grinning like she already knew the outcome. Zeke kept talking to the kids and their parents, saying sacred magic was rare, priceless, and it could heal wounds and even diseases, while the whole family stood near the house by a stone wall. Zeke leaned toward Mars, grim as death, and hissed that if this magic is still real, he and his mother think it's safer to keep it secret. Then Mars started sweating like he'd just seen a nightmare. Zeke gripped Mars's shoulders, flashed a grim little smile, and asked if he'd truly gotten everything right then. After a moment, Mars's smile exploded, his face went bright red, and he answered his father's question with a proud yes. Clouds drifted across the sky as the guys dropped to the ground and shut their eyes. Zeke fired up, telling them to lock their focus on what was underneath the navel, because that's where the magic power piles up, and that's how they learn from the guys, a talent for specific magic. The guys stayed planted on the ground, but the tension kept creeping into every face. Zeke leaned in and told them to picture that energy moving through their own bodies, because that's how they'd know whether magic had a spark in them. Magical energy started pooling in the guy's lower belly, blasting waves through his entire body. Mars could feel it, and now he had to make that power surge and circulate everywhere. Mars squeezed his eyes shut and clamped his teeth together, sweat popping up across his face as he forced himself to push magical energy through his body, like blood rushing through veins. Magical energy suddenly burst around the guys, and their parents couldn't hide their shock because somehow both of them managed to cope. Now the real test hits. They've got to figure out what kind of magic each one has, using a crystal to pinpoint it. And Ika is going to start first. Ika blushed, blazing with pure joy. As his stats got revealed, he could wield a sword, a spear, and even fire magic, and his parents froze in shock, then erupted with hope, calling him a gifted child who was destined to become a knight. Then the truth about Mars comes pouring out. He grins and scratches the back of his head like he's just nervous enough to laugh at it. His parents immediately blurt that Mars's mana level is almost 5 times higher than his and Maria's. And yeah, this kid is the real deal, straight up genius. The very next day dawned bright over the Mars house. Zeke grabbed 2 books and announced he'd bought a grimoire, while Mars lounged on Maria's lap, flipping through a picture book of a tornado, and Ike sat on Zeke's lap doing the same. Then the guys landed right on the street. Mars stepped in front of the family, shut his eyes, and thrust his hand forward, locking onto the magic in his fingertips as he prepared to chant the word wind. Mars snaps his eyes open and boldly calls out to the wind. Then just like that, a gust whips into existence from his own hand. His parents and brother stare at him in total shock as leaves and chunks of earth lift off the ground and spin into the sky. Maria clung to Mars with all her heart, and the rest of the family rushed in too, wrapping him in hugs while showering him with praise for his incredible abilities. Night crept in bit by bit as Mars's parents and brother kept praising him, and after a few more days, Ike finally unlocked fire magic when he did. Flames burned in his hand, and Marie rushed in to hug him tight. Then Zeke and Mars stood side by side, grinning like they'd just won the whole world. A full year has gone by. The guys line up at the forest's edge, right near the house, eyes shut tight, and pure silence hangs in the air. Trees crowd the yard, and beyond the house you can see jagged mountains and a dusty sky. Mars and Ike froze in place, eyes shut and faces calm. Then the guys opened their mouths and breathed in hard to lock in their concentration. Mars thrust his hands forward and started conjuring. Then a weapon snapped into his grip, and he charged into relentless attacks. Then Ike snapped his hand aside, started conjuring, and thrust it forward. Whoosh! A blazing column of fire erupted right in front of him. Sweat poured down the guys' faces as Mars thrust his hand out like a target, while Ike gripped a stick, and then, right in front of them, tables with eerie characteristics started to materialize. The kids stared ahead and spotted their parents waiting by the stone wall. Marie erupted into waving and shouted that the guys were finally back. Right then, the guys bolted toward their parents, and the kids yelled with pure joy, screaming how happy they were to finally see them again. Zeke clutched a stick in one hand and a bag in the other, while Maria held her hands out in front as she toted a bag too. Zeke flashed a grin and told the guys he'd brought something wild and interesting, and he'd reveal it to them a little later, while Maria stood beside him, biting back her smile with her hand. Then the guys lit up at Zeke's idea as the sky started to darken fast. Every member of the family packed into the house, and the kids and their parents sat around a wooden table right in front of Zeke sat a bag. Zeke yanked a sword from his bag, its blade carved with a weird, eye-catching ornament, and with his gloved hands ready, he said, "This is what I wanted to show you." Mars flicked his ability on, and boom traits lit up beside his blade. It was the sword of the Spirit of Fire, and Mars believed that if he simply gripped it in his hands, his magic would start surging. After a while, Zeke thrust the sword into Ike's hands and declared it was his to keep. Ike grabbed it, cheeks flushing, and started blurting out thanks to his father. Then Zeke dove into his bag, grabbed a book, and thrust it into Mars's hands right as he warned him to study it closely. Mars burst out, shouting that it was a real grimoire of sacred magic meant for beginners. Mars snatched the book into his hands, then clenched his fist and grinned as he loudly thanked his father for the gift. When evening finally rolled in, the world went silent outside, and only Mars's voice echoed as he fought to activate his healing power. Mars thrust his hand out and cursed. Yesterday he realized he should have used that healing power, but didn't, and Ike was right there practicing sword swings nearby. Mars shut his eyes and kept his hand held out, pushing a healing spell forward, sure that if he kept going, he would make it work. Mars knitted his brows, and a glowing magical aura surged around him, right as he kept casting the healing spell. Then a chunk of magic formed in his hand, and he finally slammed it into a fully activated healing spell. Mars whipped around to his brother, grinning as he shouted that he'd finally pulled off a healing spell, and Ike stared back in total shock. Mars strode up to his brother and blurted out why he wasn't drawing the salamander sword. Then Ike snapped his head toward him, stunned, sword still resting on his shoulder. Beads of sweat drenched Ike's face from training, and with a grin, he looked at his brother, telling him Dad said to master the basics first. So that's why Ike's swinging a different sword. Mars grinned at his brother and said he got it all. Then their father's whole vibe turned stone serious. Meanwhile, Ike lounged there with a sword on his shoulder, cracking up like it was the funniest thing in the world. The guys swung to the side the second they heard someone shout their names, and the moment they recognized it, their expressions flipped to pure panic, mouths gaping and eyes bulging wide. The kids were yanked in by their parents, stumbling toward the house while bruises covered their backs. Maria clutched Zeke's hand and steadied him so he could keep walking. The kids bolted back in terror to their injured parents, yelling that Mom and Dad were definitely okay, while their parents stumbled up to a stone fence on the road home. With smiles still glued to their faces, his parents started claiming the dungeon monster had attacked them. Then they asked, like it was nothing, if the guys could bring towels. Mars snapped at them to stop, rushed to look them over, and saw the truth. His father's wounds were far worse than his mother's. Mars thrust his hands forward like he meant business, and Zeke stared at him, baffled, asking what the heck he was trying to pull off, because Mars just kept his hands up and unleashed the healing spell. A fierce glow flared in front of Zeke's face, and his wounds started sealing up piece by piece, while Mars frantically wiped the sweat off him with his hand. Maria stood there staring at her son in shock, as Mars kept healing her too. Maria and Zeke gaped in shock, then pressed their hands to their own bodies and started praising in awe while Mars's healing magic erased every last wound from their parents. Mars stood before his parents, grinning with his eyes squeezed shut, and blurted that he'd managed to heal every single wound. Maria and Zeke clapped their hands to their faces. Zeke even let his staff drop. Then he told everyone that thanks to Mars, they were finally okay again, and the kids just stood there in front of their parents, perfectly silent. Maria sprinted up to Mars and slammed him into a tight hug, eyes shut as she blurted out, teary with joy, that she was so thankful he'd already learned healing magic. Mars's cheeks flared, and he hugged her right back, smiling like his heart had just won. Maria and Mars clung to each other in a long, happy hug, grinning, like they couldn't believe it, while Ike beside them burst out laughing his head off. Meanwhile, Zeke stood off to the side and just watched, face unreadable. Night fell, and the fireplace flames crackled to life as the whole family crowded around a wooden table, each one staring down a steaming mug. Zeke leaned in and announced it was time to kick off a family meeting and talk about what's coming next. Zeke's face went stone cold as he stared at the guys and told them, "It's time to talk about our work. My mother's expecting it. These aren't normal people. They're adventurers who dive into dungeons and wipe out monsters in the area." Zeke grabbed a mug and kept talking, saying that long ago, the one ruler who owned this land ordered him to take on a monster in a dungeon. The kids sat across from their parents, hanging on every word as their dad told his story. Zeke slammed his mug onto the table and said, "Today, me and Mom went into the dungeon, and we just learned Mars can use sacred power, and we're not leaving it there. We've got something brewing." The boys planted their hands on the table and leaned in as their dad spoke, and Zeke even shot up a finger saying they could pitch in with him, and their mom could work too, but the big choice is coming only after a year, when Zeke decides for himself once his sons are grown. Firelight crackled in the fireplace as the boys grinned at their father and nodded along, and then Zeke cut in, practically bubbling with excitement, promising the guys he had even more news coming. Zeke clasped his hands on the table, grinned like he knew a secret, and told the room that soon they'd be getting a younger brother or sister. Maria blushed, slid her hand onto Zeke's arm, and matched his smile, while the world outside the window stayed pitch black. Mars snatched the table, cheeks blazing red as shock hit him hard. He couldn't believe the news he just heard from his father. Ike sat right beside him, and Mars clenched both hands into fists, then burst into this huge, unstoppable grin of pure joy. Another year rolled by, and right beside Mars's family house, a lush tree burst up like it had waited all this time. while fluffy clouds drifted overhead. Then the guys stepped outside with swords in hand, ready to charge and cut each other down. After a few tense moments, the guys slammed toward each other, Mars using his wind control power, pushing the trade's acceleration into overdrive. The guys closed in and started trading blows like pros, fists and steel flying. Mars was locked in. He hacked at Ike with his sword, and Ike answered instantly, swinging back at his own brother. After a while, the swords of the brothers finally came together, and those guys stared at each other with bright smiles, fully locked in, and weird electric pockets of energy started swirling around them. Mars and Ike kept trading blows with big, fearless smiles, like they loved every second of it, because Mars couldn't shake the feeling that so much had changed over the past year. Their stats inched up, but the fact that they could only use special skills on a low level screamed their abilities weren't fully there yet. Ike gripped a flaming sword and kept training hard, while his parents and Mars stood behind him, cheering his skill. Then the door swung open, and Mars froze, thinking Ike was finally messing with a magic blade. But the truth was way bigger, because something huge was about to happen. This huge moment, Mars and Ike's sister finally arrived, right as Mars sparked his power and clocked her name, was Lena, a girl packed with water magic and earth magic. She was tucked in her crib under a blanket, grinning like she already knew the world was about to change. The whole family crowded around Lena's crib, all grinning at her with pure love, while Lena strained forward on her blankets, reaching out so they all leaned in, squealing at how adorable she was. After a little while, the whole family ended up crammed around the dinner table, but the fireplace stayed cold and dark. No fire, no warmth. Each of them had a glass of drink waiting in front of their spot, and Zeke launched into it right away. A whole year had gone by, and the guys were way stronger than he'd ever expected. Zeke leaned on the table and told everyone that starting tomorrow, they'd all head out exploring together, while Ike nodded along with his father, and Maria frowned, fighting off the anxious thoughts that wouldn't leave her alone. The guys stared at their mother, terrified. Then she kept pressing the point. If they brought Mars along to patch up their wounds, the battle might even stay calm with him nearby. Then Maria shot out of her chair and braced herself on the table, yelling at full volume that Mars was only 3 years old and that she was terrified about it. Maria planted her feet on the floor and leaned hard on the table, shouting that Mars could be a gifted kid, but it was way too soon for him to jump into battles like that. Zeke braced his hands on the table and hung on every word, while the boys stayed totally silent, soaking up their mother's message. Marie slid back into the chair, grabbed the mug, and stared at it like it held answers. Then, after a moment's thought, Maria said it was way too soon for Ike to join the battles. She'd go herself, but babysitting Lena was going to be a total slog. After a long moment of thinking, Marie snapped her eyes to Mars and asked him straight up what he really thought, while Zeke and Ike just stared at Maria and Mars like they couldn't blink. And behind Zeke, a huge window framed lush trees and a thick, cloudy sky. Mars stared at Zeke and said he wanted to go with his dad and Ike, but he still got what his mom meant. Maria clutched her mug in both hands, gave her youngest son a heartbreaking look, then shut her eyes and whispered that she understood. Mars's face lit up the moment he heard his mom say they should stay together as a family of 3, never let themselves drift apart, and steer clear of places soaked in magic. Then Ike grinned back at her. Maria lifted a finger, her face set in stone, and told them straight the boys were still kids, so they couldn't touch the equipment, but they'd better stay sharp, because anything could happen. In the room, a cupboard bristled with dishes, and Maria kept firing warnings at the kids about every danger and what to grab before anything happened. Then Zeke caught his wife's words and stared in shock, because she started talking straight about him, and when she did, he just grinned and told her she could lean on him. Clouds drifted over Mars's home like a warning flag, covering him and his family, and the guys ended up out on the street, just steps from the house. Maria waved them off and shoved good luck into the moment Zeke clutched his staff and bag. Ike had a sword strapped to his back, and Mars stood there, fighting back tears as he told his mom goodbye. The guys suddenly found themselves right by the guild building, while Mars and Ike stood outside, staring around like they were piecing things together, because the place was packed with people, and right on the building itself, an inscription and the guild's coats of arms stared back at them. Mars stared at a man and a woman laughing and chatting like they were the first other kids he'd ever seen, besides himself. Then his pupils snapped sharp, and he activated his clairvoyance. The young man shot his hand up and whispered something to the girl with a grin, and she burst into laughter right back nearby. The guys had tables lined up with all their stats, and Mars stared at them, wondering if he and his brother were truly strong enough. Zeke rolled up to the guys with a grin, admitted he was late, and grabbed the job of hunting monsters right as the city stretched around them with those towering multi-story buildings, and everyone kept flowing past in every kind of outfit while the guys followed along down the street. A mighty tree swayed under the wind, and leaves rained down. The guys suddenly found themselves staring at a long wall where 2 knights stood guard at the gate. Zeke grinned at them and told them they had to push through. The gate swung open, and the guys sprinted ahead in pure excitement, while Zeke stepped through at an unhurried pace, eyes locked on his children the whole time. The guy skidded to a stop on the road, and Ike's sword clinked at his back. Zeke strode up to them as the wind whipped dust and leaves into a frenzy, and Mars's face lit up with pure joy. Then he stared ahead and grinned like crazy. Guys and Zeke stared out at the rolling hills as the road carved through the land straight toward a dark forest and towering mountains, while the wind howled past, whipping leaves into the air and scattering dust in its wake. Zeke snapped his hand to his belt, clutched his staff in the other, grinned, and admitted he never thought they'd reach this place this fast. Mars shot a look into the bushes, then a horrifying sound ripped out of them, coming from just a short distance from where the guys were standing. Mars snapped his ability on and zoomed his gaze toward the source of the noise, then froze, shocked, as he spotted a bunch of monsters tucked in the bushes, cackling like it was all a joke. Deep in the bushes, a bunch of monsters loomed in filthy rags, snickering and staring each other down. Then Mars jolted and realized with a start they were goblins, the kind with pitiful stats. The monsters stared at the guys, trembling as Zeke let out this eerie, strange sound. And right then, the goblins charged in pure rage in their eyes while Zeke grinned and told the guys, "I'm going to show you how to handle monsters, and Ike, you do the same." The monsters thundered toward the guys, and Zeke snapped his gaze to his sons. "Ike, you've got this with fire, but keep the sword ready at all times." Then he thrust his hand out and started conjuring. Then Zeke snatched up a staff, raised it like a weapon, chanted a spell, and boom! Stones blasted through the air at the monsters. Some struck true, while others whizzed right past them. 2 monsters crashed down. One was left totally unharmed. Zeke dropped into a crouch behind Ike and snapped, "Now attack it!" Ike thrust his hands forward and started weaving his conjuration. The monster's grin widened as it flicked out its claws to strike. Ike stared back with pure, unshakable focus. A monster loomed just a few meters from Ike. Then Ike thrust his hands forward and blasted it with fire the moment it closed in. A deafening boom ripped through the air, and a blinding flash swallowed the monster's sight. The monster crumpled to the ground as flames swallowed it whole. Then it shrieked and thrashed its hands and feet against the earth, while Zeke watched, grinning and praising Ike for an absolutely killer job. After a while, the flames died out, leaving only black ash and a few smoky wisps rising from the monster, and Zeke slowly started stepping toward it, while the boys stayed frozen, staring at their father's moves. Zeke strode up to the monster's wreckage, shoved aside the burning coals, and spotted a tiny crystal sitting in the dirt. Then he leaned in and reminded everyone, "Win the fight, and don't forget to grab the magic stone." Zeke snatched the stone into his hand, kept talking, and told him, point blank, "Bring this to the guild, then they'll buy a magic stone from you." The monster's leftovers erupted again, and Zeke clutched his staff, insisting he had to burn every last remnant before those things could rot into undead horrors. The flames died out, and the monster was gone. Nothing but cold ashes. The guys and Zeke stared in silence as Zeke hoisted the bag on his shoulder and declared, "We're done. Time to move on." Mars's face flushed red as he grinned at his father and declared, "Next time we run into a monster, I'm using my magic too." Zeke gripped a staff, stared at Mars, and smirked. "Sorry, wind magic won't cut down monsters, so you can't fight them." Mars shut his eyes and grinned wide, then said, "In battle, I carve with wind blades, not the wind itself," while his jacket and shirt hung right on him. Zeke's expression snapped hard. Sweat poured down his face as his eyes went wide and his mouth flew open, and he blurted out that Mars had already mastered wind blades. And yeah, he was wearing gloves and a button-down jacket. Mars grinned at his father and said he finally figured out how to throw wind blades after messing around with the wind, and that one stubborn tuft of hair on his head just kept sticking straight up. Zeke grinned with nerves, one hand gripping his staff while the other clutched the strap of his shoulder bag. He stared at his son and said they could try kicking off an attack on monsters from Mars and Mars beam back at his dad. The guys were suddenly shoved into a new spot. Then Zeke let out that strange sound again, and those goblins snapped their heads toward him. The monsters charged straight for where the guys stood, and Mars thrust his hand forward because after Zeke's attack, he had to strike. Mars scowled and bided his time as the monsters closed in, and the first one flashed a nasty grin while it swung that clawed paw, so Ike had to rush in with his sword. But Mars kept his hand out and waited, just for the perfect opening. Mars's hand ignited with glowing power, while Ike stood right behind him, sword at the ready, and Zeke beside the crew, hype as ever. Then Mars thrust his palm forward and unleashed a raging windblade, slicing one monster clean in half. Zeke's frown snapped into a wicked grin as he raised his magic staff and blasted one monster to pieces, while Ike clutched his sword in his fists, tore straight toward the last threat, and swung hard to strike it down too. Zeke snapped his abilities on, and the monsters' bodies burst into flames while Mars yanked a crystal from one of them. Then Zeke cupped his son's head, praised his crew for a job well done, told them to keep pushing, and promised they'd head home right after. Deep in a forest ringed tight with trees, battle roared through the air. Then Mars shot his hand forward and conjured his power, eyes locked in pure seriousness, while Ike scowled, gripping his sword as he came in hard with a crushing strike. Ike raised his razor-sharp sword toward the fallen monster, eyes shut, then snapped his hand forward and slammed a fire spell into it. Mars was right there until, in the very next heartbeat, Ike clocked something. Ike thrust his hands up, stared at them in disbelief, and blurted out that his level had shot up. Then a shaky burst of glowing light ripped into view, and a table with boosted stats materialized around him as the same fire kept roaring, burning right alongside him. Zeke stepped aside, gripped his staff, and flashed a grin as he told the guys they'd nailed it. Now they could finally head home. Mars nodded along with his father's words, while Ike scratched the back of his head, mortified, and shuffled over to his relatives. After a while, the guys finally landed back at home. There was Mars, planted at the table, shoveling down food. Then he stepped out onto the grass, snapped his magic into place, and just like that, before long, he was back in bed again. Throughout all of it, Mars kept telling himself he was truly there to raise his level too. After what felt like forever, the guys finally ended up in the forest right in front of a massive pile of goblins. Mars thrust his arms forward and swore today was the day he'd clear his level in a full-on race, and the goblins immediately noticed him pointing straight at them. In the very next second, Mars flicks his abilities on and smashes the toothy monsters with roaring wind blades, and right away, they unleash terrifying screams. The second Mars finished the attack, his whole body lit up and shimmered like a blazing signal joy, flooding him as his level shot higher, while the defeated monsters crumpled in that clearing, ringed by dark forest. Mars thrust his hand forward, fist clenched like a weapon, and erupted in a loud shout that his level had finally shot up, while Zeke and Ike stood by the trees, watching monsters creep around them. Zeke slid a hand onto his belt, grinning as he said, "So leveling up for Mars is gonna be brutal." Ike gripped his sword and started clapping for his brother, while one monster lay still at the roots of a tree. The guys huddled side by side, and when Mars glanced back, he said there weren't many goblins around, because between the trees, a mountain of dead monster bodies just lay there, totally motionless. Zeke strode up to the monster corpses and snapped that this was way too abnormal to ignore, so it was straight to the guild. Then he frowned hard, realizing that in just 2 days they'd slaughtered more monsters than they ever should, and that was seriously bad news. Zeke and the guys were chilling at home when Zeke suddenly snapped monsters were multiplying like crazy in Almeria, and the adventurers kept wiping them out non-stop. But with too few people left, the guild had no choice but to switch the mission. The whole family crowded around the table and Zeke slammed his hands down, warning, "This trip is going to be dangerous." Then he leaned in, demanding to hear what everyone thought. Ike slapped his palms on the table and said they should go there together. Right beside him sat a cup with a drink waiting. Ike stared ahead and burst out that he'd gladly help, so long as it was just goblins waiting. Maria snapped with fury, blasting out that this place wouldn't just be crawling with goblins. Something far stronger would show up out of nowhere, and it was straight up dangerous. A mug of drink sat right in front of Mars, and as he stared ahead, he grinned, admitting he still wasn't strong enough, so he decided he was done with this hike. Mars slammed his hands on the table and grinned, telling everyone his father could refuse this assignment, while Ike stared at his brother like he was trying to read his mind, and Zeke stayed frozen with both hands planted on the table, saying nothing. Zeke grabbed a mug, took a drink, and started to say he wanted to delay this task, but then he flipped it and offered, just like always, to go wreck monsters and farm experience, and the guys all nodded and agreed with their dad. After a beat, a hellish monster with a dog's head lunged into view, and Zeke shrugged like one cobalt was nothing. Then a weird table of stats blinked beside it, showing the OZ index at 15. Endless dog-headed monsters swarmed the guys from all sides, and Zeke's nerves were shot as he kept blurting that a whole horde of kobolds was already bad news. Mars tightened into a fighter's stance, and Ike snapped into position too, gripping his sword in both hands. The next second, the guys bolted. Zeke grinned and told them that when things get this messy, you retreat first and handle the monsters one by one. Then Zeke snapped around, staring the monsters down with that same wild smile. Zeke and the boys spun around to strike back, and that pack of monsters smirked as their claws started to come out. Zeke roared that they'd beat these monsters down, then cracked one across the head with a grin. Mars and Ike got locked in, trading swing-for-swing blows as one wave of monsters after another slammed into them, claws out, mouths open, teeth flashing. Ike gripped his sword with both hands and slammed back the toothy monsters' attacks. Then he surged forward and started carving them down, while Mars thrust his hand out and unleashed his windblade, slicing the monsters' heads clean off. The guys huddled at the forest's edge, a bag sitting on the ground between them. And after trading uneasy looks, they decided to head home because over the last month, their bond and abilities had jumped forward in a huge way. Ike rode a sword across his shoulder while Mars kept stride beside him, and a heavy backpack thumped on Ike's back as they backed away from the dying fire, everything happening right at the edge of the forest. Mars glanced at his sleeping little sister in the crib. Her hair had grown long and grinned, thinking, "All right, it's time to tell her about the heavenly eye." The whole family sat around the table, stacked with plates of food, and just when the silence felt unbreakable, Mars snapped it open and called for his parents, who stared at him like he'd just flipped the script. Mars's face flushed a little, and with a grin tugging at his lips, he said, like he'd just figured it out, he could finally use the analysis skill now. Maria and Zeke gaped, mouths hanging open, because Mars's words hit them like a punch. They were too stunned to speak. Zeke narrowed his eyes and started to stammer, freaking out because he swore Mars could actually see the status of everyone nearby. Right in front of Mars sat a plate of food, a spoon, and a glass of drink. And when his father spoke up, Mars grinned, told him he was right, and said he could even see the status of every object. Ike shot up from his chair, jabbed his fingers at the class, and the parents burst into joyful hugs. Zeke stared at Mars in shock, and Mars said they could finally talk about the Almeria expedition again. Mars stood on the floor, fists clenched tight, and snapped that there were way too many goblins around. Then he wondered out loud if it wouldn't be better to figure out what was really going on. Zeke stared at Mars in pure shock, practically reeling from what his son had just said. Maria clung to Zeke and flashed him a grin, telling him she was with Mars too, turns out. Maybe it wasn't such a terrible idea after all. Zeke peered down and said the idea sounded absolutely perfect. Then he turned to the smiling kids and admitted, "Damn, they've grown up way too fast." Zeke hooked his hands on his belt, grinned, and promised he'd grab those personal assignments tomorrow. Then the guys stared at their father and nodded along, agreeing behind them. Maria clasped her hands and smiled at the whole family. The very next morning rolled in with fluffy clouds drifting overhead, and the whole family packed together at the horse cart, Maria clutching her daughter close, while Zeke leaned in and told them the guild was genuinely grateful they'd agreed to take on the job. The boys piled into the cart, and it lurched into motion while Ike thrust his arm up to wave goodbye to his mother. Maria cradled the house in her arms and warned them to be careful as the road carried them toward the mountains and that strange, looming figure ahead. Zeke gripped the reins while Mars rode beside him and asked, "If we take this road west, what are we walking into?" Zeke shot back, "The mine abandoned for ages." Then a monster erupted on the horizon, and Mars instantly snapped into action. The guys barreled past the monster headless, sprawled on the ground, still burning, and Ike sat in the wagon, scanning the area like something was about to jump out, when a battered old wooden sign finally came into view along the edge of the road. The guys blinked in disbelief because they were standing on a ledge, staring down into a massive stone complex packed with goblins everywhere, chattering around the fire, striking bonfires to light the night, then crashing on the ground to sleep. Up on the hill, the guys braced as Zeke blared, trying to pull the goblins' attention. Then Ike launched down after them, thrusting his hand forward as flames erupted and started chewing through monsters, and the goblins all stared at him, frozen in sudden terror. Ike grabbed his sword, snapped into a fighting stance, and right as the goblins came roaring at him, a sharp smirk twisted his face. He ducked, dodged, and sprang aside like a ghost. After a while, Zeke and Mars thrust their hands forward and started conjuring, while Ike stood right by his father beside Mars. Then the spellwork kicked in, and he unleashed magic that pounded the goblins in a full-on barrage, shaking them into loud, panicked noise. Mars was drenched in sweat. He wiped his face with a quick swipe, grinned, and said they'd crushed it. Then he pushed the level even higher. Finally, Mars yanked a magic crystal straight out of the fire, and the numbers on that table jumped up like crazy compared to last time. Mars gripped a glowing magic crystal, then snapped his gaze toward where Ike had called out to Zeke, because Zeke stood there with a baton in one hand and a backpack strap in the other, staring back at Ike, while the two of them were boxed in by two-story stone buildings all around. Zeke froze in place, staring up like he'd just seen a ghost. Then the guys behind him snapped to attention and stared too, because suddenly they were standing in front of a giant wooden door, and the whole crew started buzzing in shock about where this store could possibly lead. After a beat, the door creaked and then swung open just enough for an angry horde of monsters to pour into view. Zeke jerked his mouth open in shock, and the ones holding the magic wand lifted that hand just a little while. The guys around them stared, mouths agape, in pure disbelief. A swarm of tiny goblins spilled out of the building, and right in the middle lurched one huge goblin, stacked with brutal HP and stamina. Zeke stared it down and snapped. "That's a hobgoblin, they don't quit. They're tenacious and tough as nails." Zeke slung the bag to the dirt, snapped into a fighting stance, and said they'd smash the goblins first, then they'd hunt the hobgoblin next. Mars barely moved, staring up, while Ike grabbed his sword and lunged with attack-ready fury. Mars thrust his hands forward and summoned wind magic, while Ike barreled toward the monsters straight at the giant goblin with the small ones flanking him, only for Mars's spell to slice them apart mid-charge. That huge goblin rocked pierced ears as a roaring wind attack barreled straight for him. Then it slammed into his chest, and the monster flinched hard, teeth grinding with pure pain. Next thing you know, Ike is launched into the air, sword drawn, charging straight at that massive goblin. Ike's brows knit in full-on focus, and as soon as the goblin spots him, rage flashes across its face, veins bulging while a nasty grin spreads wide. Ike was about to close in on the big goblin, but the thing bared its teeth and shoved Ike's strike back. Then Ike spun his sword to deflect the hit, crashed to the ground, and set himself for round two, pushing off and sprinting straight at it. Mars thrust his hands forward, brows locked tight, ready to explode into another strike on the towering goblin, while Zeke screamed for him to target those eyes. Then Mars and armed Ike lunged together, crashing into the monster. A giant goblin with pierced ears shot his hand forward, trying to block Mars's wind blast. Then he opened his mouth wide as the gust swerved past his paw and slammed right into his face. Ike barreled forward with pure seriousness on his face, and as he sprinted at the massive goblin, he gripped his sword tight in his hand. The moment Mars's attack slammed into the monster's muzzle, it snapped its mouth wide and blasted out terrifying noises, while the monster furiously clawed at its own muzzle to cover it up. After a moment, Ike was blasting through the air, hovering right above the massive goblin. This thing stood on the ground with its clawed paws shoved over its muzzle, and Mars's attack had already carved a fresh abrasion into its chest. Ike charged straight at the monster and swung with everything. Then he landed on his feet like a storm, arms thrown wide, sword gripped in one hand, eyes locked in a deadly stare with his brows twisted into a hard, unwavering fury. Ike snapped upright, and behind him, the big goblin lay sprawled with a few small ones scattered around. Zeke grinned and told him, "You handled it perfectly, Ike." Ike snatched the magic crystal from inside the big goblin, stared at it in shock because it was insanely huge, and behind him, Zeke lit the fire, then flinched, peering out through the crack in the door. A heavy, gloomy dread clung to the back of the room as Zeke carefully started to speak. This place was a maze, and if the goblin spilled out, it wouldn't just be trouble, because something worse could crawl out behind them too. Zeke stood by that massive door as Mars marched up to his father and started laying out their next plan. Then Zeke turned to his son and snapped that they needed to scout the place first. Zeke snapped his gaze away and kept talking. If goblins are in the room, they'll race to the guild and tell them the monsters are coming from right here. The guys pushed into the gloomy room, where towering brick walls hunched on both sides and the doors, scarred, old and rusted, groaned open straight into it, and the boys nodded along with their father's call. The massive door to the gloomy room slammed shut, and Zeke gripped a magic staff as he strode in front, while the others followed right behind inside, the air filled with dark, terrifying sounds. Zeke gripped his magic staff, raised it, and jabbed it toward the next door while he urged the guys to check this spot, then haul back. The door groaned, creaked, and popped open just a crack. Zeke burst into the room and froze, terrified by what stood there, 3 robed monsters gripping staffs, and right beside them, a table of abilities popped into view, revealing they wielded earth magic. Zeke and the others crouched behind a wall, gripping a magic staff as he warned them those monsters were goblin magicians, and the guys behind him stared at them in shock. Zeke huddled behind the wall, stared at the monsters, and blurted out that they're using magic, so taking them down won't be easy. Torches burned, and vases sat scattered on the floor, and when the monsters rose, they turned and stared straight at the guys. The guys, with Zeke at their side, grabbed their weapons and charged straight into the attack. Zeke thrust the magic staff forward and roared that they had to wipe out the monsters before they fired off their spell, so everyone had to move lightning fast. Zeke strode toward the monsters, grinning like he had nothing to fear. While Ike and Mars scowled with grim focus, the goblin magicians saw the two charging at them, and their courage instantly crumbled into pure terror. Mars lifted his hand and started conjuring. Ike hacked into the monsters with his sword, and Zeke swung his staff. Then a satisfied smile stretched across his face. Ike lit the goblin bodies on fire. Then Zeke pushed forward and suddenly found himself staring at a chest target. He snapped at Mars to scan it with analysis, because it had trap written all over it. And the moment Mars's eyes shifted, he triggered the ability. Right by that floor-standing chest, a strange rule was written in the air. What you pull out all comes down to how lucky you are. So when Mars glared at his father, he insisted the chest wasn't dangerous at all, and that the contents were tied to luck points. Zeke strode up to Mars, grinned at the chest, and told him, like it was obvious, "Then Mars, open it." Mars stared suspiciously toward the chest, still watching his back. Mars strode up to the chest, lowered his hands, and started prying it open until a sharp creak snapped through the air. The second Mars laid eyes on the chest's contents. His eyes lit up because inside sat a fire bracelet, and right beside it was a strange symbol that boosted his magic by 4 points and marked it with a C level. Ike shot his arm up, bracelet and all, and hollered in pure joy that this would crank his fire even higher, while Zeke and Mars stood right there, grinning like they'd just pulled off the biggest win. Above the guild building, the sky blazed bright, clouds drifting like they owned the place. Then the guys finally piled inside, and Zeke stared ahead, announcing they'd come to deliver a report to the guildmaster, with a crowd of startled teammates flanking him. The guys loitered at the reception desk when Zeke finally declared that his kids would come with him. While in the room, men crowded around tables, pounding drinks from wooden mugs, and at the same desk stood a girl in a sharp suit, watching it all. The guys stumbled into yet another room, huge shelves packed with books, stretching wall to wall, where an older man sat at the table in front of them and immediately praised Zeke, saying he'd done an amazing job. Wrinkles clawed at the man's face as he stared at Zeke, stunned that Zeke could even clock those kids while a giant window loomed over the room. Zeke jabbed his finger at the kids and declared, "Those are my sons, Mars and Ike." Ike and Mars grinned, introduced themselves, and beamed, saying they were thrilled to finally meet the guildmaster. The guy shoved himself up, marched right to the edge of the desk, and then boom, he introduced himself as Ralph Sargent, while Zeke and the crew just stared at him. Ralph was caught off guard when Zeke suddenly launched into it, saying he and the guys had come to talk about the quest they were on. Zeke started remembering the monsters they'd have to face, and then bam, he revealed that the back of that abandoned village had turned into a twisted maze, where they ran into a hobgoblin and goblin magicians. Zeke furrowed his brow and snapped that the maze had barely started. Then it would keep expanding, and they'd be in serious trouble fast. Ralph was already drenched in sweat, panicking like the walls were closing in. Ralph hunched his shoulders and swore he'd run the news straight to Count Carmel. Zeke stood right in front of him. The others hovered behind Zeke, and behind Ike and Mars loomed a big, shut door. The guys grinned as they stared ahead, and Zeke jumped in, saying he wanted to register the kids as adventurers. Zeke's mind snapped back to those guys' slick moves, and he kept telling everyone that the kids walked with him through the maze because if they hadn't eaten, Zeke wouldn't have been able to absorb all that info. Ralph snapped upright, scratched the back of his head like he was terrified, and blurted that Zeke was right. These guys were still just kids. Zeke smiled and said Ike could swing a sword, spear, and even fire magic, while Mars could tap into Vera magic. Then Ralph's face twisted with doubt, and he just didn't buy it. Ralph's eyes widened as he saw the guys, and before he could even speak, they all nodded along with their father, then slammed into action, activating their powers. Ike thrust his hands forward and conjured flames, while wind surged around Mars. Ralph thrust his hand forward and blared out that he'd register Ike and Mars as adventurers himself, right there. Their faces flushed bright red, and they burst into smiles at the good news. Then they all shouted in one thunderous voice that they were grateful to Ralph, screaming so hard the whole street could hear them, while night slowly crept in. After a while, the guys ended up back at home, and right away, fighting erupted near the house. Then Ike started getting lifted off the Martian ground. While Mars burst into praise for his brother's skills, Ike shot back that Mars was overhyping him and that he'd grow way more powerful with time. Ike gripped his sword and helped lift Marsa with a grin blazing across his face, and right there Zeke stood nearby, calling out to the guys. Then his smile snapped into place the moment he heard they were happy to see him. The whole family ended up squeezed around a chunky wooden table, and Zeke slammed his hands down and demanded they talk about the award because they'd gotten it, and since 3 people earned it, they'd have to split it 3 ways. Ike raised his arm, bracelet gleaming, and jabbed at it with his finger, then grinned and declared the fire bracelet was all he'd need. Mars slapped his palms on the table, grinned, and said he wanted to study Earth's magic, and all he needed was for Zeke to back him up and help. The parents stared at their son, stunned, then burst into roaring laughter, hands flying to their mouths. Zeke slapped a hand over his face and, still laughing, admitted the guys were right in their repertoire. Then Zeke grinned and agreed to teach the magic of Mars. Zeke pulled out the adventurer's cards and shoved them into the guys' hands, and the moment they saw them, their faces lit up with excitement until Maria snapped her eyes to Zeke in shock. When he told her the guildmaster and Count Carmel had just sent a request, Zeke clasped his hands, face dead serious, and said they wanted him and the guys to team up with other adventurers to explore the maze, promising them the title of Baron as a reward. So what did the guys think? Maria blushed hard and nodded yes to the proposal, beaming all the while. Then Ike and Mars matched her smile and agreed too, backing Zeke's idea, and Zeke grinned like, "Perfect," before pushing them to get to work. After some time, a huge line of people poured out of the city, and the road turned into a living highway. Carts rolled alongside them, packed with horses, while woody trees and thick shrubs crowded both sides. 6 months rolled by fast, and the town square was packed. Mars and his family were right in the crowd, and Mars, along with Maria, pushed through excited talk about the tests finally coming out, successful. Before their eyes, the guys' new tables with upgraded specs rolled in and took their place. Zeke had a bag slung over his shoulder when he locked eyes with a huge crowd. Then the long-haired man stepped forward, started greeting him, and thanked him over and over for his work. A long-haired man grinned while a bunch of people crowded around him right there. A girl in a witch's hat held a little girl close, and this was the Blue Fang crew, pulling in at the D rank. The girl grinned so wide her cheeks ached, stretching her arms straight out, and Maria, smiling bright, started telling everyone she was truly thankful for the guys for taking care of Lena. On the estate stood a gorgeous tiled roof house, and all around it sat a bunch of practical buildings within the courtyard, because this was Baron Bryant's home. Everyone in the family was packed around a wooden table except Lena with mugs of drink in hand, and Zeke flashed a grin as he urged them to push into the maze's deeper depths. Zeke's brow tightened as he pressed on. That they'd be getting married that evening, everyone needed to be ready. The guys stared at their father, and all nodded in perfect sync, backing his plan without a single doubt. Zeke ended up at the maze door and threw out a quick, "You ready?" And when they said yes, he ordered them to move out. He wasn't alone either. Maria stood beside him. Ike clutched a stick, and Mars grinned while holding a knife. The entire family got trapped inside a stone room, monsters lined up ahead of them, and while they froze in the doorway, Zeke told Ike and Mars to handle those monsters by themselves. The guys all nodded at the father's question, then charged toward the cluster of tiny monsters along with the one gigantic nightmare waiting ahead. And as they closed in, the monsters got ready, with a thick fog rolling up from beneath their feet. The guys burst forward, and right away Ike grips a stick while his sword rides his back. Mars clenches a knife wrapped in wind magic, and a swarm of tiny goblins surges at them to strike. Ike knotted his brows tight, then locked onto the target and grabbed the stick with both hands. When the light struck his face, he bared his teeth and drove himself into one crushing swing at the monsters. The second the monsters closed in on Ike, he exploded into action, smashing into them with everything he had, until one by one they scattered, streaking off in every direction, while the ones on the sidelines froze in terror, staring as he tore through them. Monsters surged in on Ike from every direction, while goblin magicians on the sidelines leveled their magic wands at him. Then one of the monsters snarled through clenched teeth and slammed into Ike with a magic staff. Ike barely had time to blink before Mars erupted right in front of him, floating in the air and blasting the goblin magician's attack back with pure magic. When those goblin mages saw Mars, fear hit them like a storm. Mars gripped a knife, then surged forward toward the monsters. After a few seconds, Mars unleashed the fastest strike right behind the monsters, and the moment his attack hit, they got blasted in the light, fully exposed. Mars slammed onto the floor, clawing to his feet on his knees. Then a hulking goblin dropped over him and started hacking at his body. Mars locked eyes with it, grit tightening in his jaw. And as the goblin swung, Mars burst sideways right as the blade crashed into the ground. Mars hung in the air, brow furrowed, and his dad's words slammed into his head. Aim for the monster's eyes, then strike. So Mars lashed out with a knife wrapped in wind magic. The Mars attack slammed the big goblin right in the eyes, and Mars hit the floor in front of it just as the goblin dropped to one knee, hands flying up to shield his face from the agony, and then let out horrifying, loud screams. Ike didn't waste a second. He snatched a spear, lined up the shot, and in a blink, he hurled it straight at his target, the thing streaking through the air with brutal speed. Ike hurled his spear at the monster, which clamped its clawed paws over its face, and it ripped past Mars, who stood right in front of it. Then, with Ike's strike, the monster crumpled onto the ground, and the guys spun their heads toward the spot where the wooden chest sat. After a moment, a brand new spear materialized in Ike's hands, and he shot it up over his head like a trophy, gazing at it with pure excitement. Then a stats table popped up beside it, a fire spear that boosts his attack by 20. Everyone in the family packed in, marched to the spot, and headed down the corridor, while Ike leaned his old spear against the wall, and Mars took point. Then, after a bit, Zeke's face lit up with pure joy, and he grinned from ear to ear. Zeke stood in the hallway, staring at the door as it burst into a blinding glow, while the corridor split ahead with branches stretching to the right, to the left, and forward. After they slipped through the hallowed door, Mars and her family landed on the street, and the quiet hit hard until Zeke snapped that they'd rest for a bit in a safe area right beneath the sun pouring over the wild, shrubby plants. Mars and his family sprawled onto the grass, slapped down a blanket, and finally kicked back to rest, while Zeke and his wife traded looks and burst out laughing. Meanwhile, Mars and Ike dug into their food with total joy, and thick, lush plants towered behind them like a living backdrop. After a while, Mars flopped onto the blanket, pressed his hands to his stomach, and dropped into sleep while his knife sat on the bedspread right beside him, its upgraded features already uncovered. After a while, Mars and his family got dragged back into a gloomy cave down the stairs, into a room packed with monsters while they huddled on the second floor, hemmed in by little terrors and massive beasts crowding them from every direction. Mars and the entire family grinned with pure malice. Then the corridor erupted as screams and brutal fighting thundered through the halls. Mars and his family huddled at the gigantic door in this massive room, while torches crackled on both sides of the gate. Zeke slung a bag over his shoulder and complained that the gates were way too damn huge, and beyond it all, the defeated monsters' bodies sprawled across the floor. The door groaned as it swung wide, and Mars with his family froze in the doorway, eyes locked on what waited ahead, because a whole pack of massive monsters stared right back. Mars and his family grabbed their weapons and snapped into battle stances, while the big goblin stared them down. Itching to strike right behind them loomed a towering armored goblin gripping brutal weapons in his paws, and Zeke couldn't stop himself from trembling in sheer terror. A gigantic goblin in clanging armor, weapon clenched in his paws, just stood there when Mars saw it. Panic hit hard, and he snapped on his assessment ability. The verdict flashed a goblin general strong, fast, and built to last. Mars stared at his parents as they lifted their hands and started aiming at the monsters. Then they grinned and talked about the Goblin King waiting for them at the very end, so Mars was like, "Guys, watch your parents wreck them." The Goblin General lunged his weapon forward and tore into the air with a savage roar. Then the smaller goblins sprinted in to swarm the guys while Zeke started casting his Earth Fortress and Maria snapped out the spell for the Ice Fortress. A stone dome slammed into place over Zeke, and a showering dome of crystals bloomed above Maria. Then the loudest noise ripped through the air. Goblins surged to smash the protective domes guarding Zeke and Maria, and their general shoved everyone aside, charging straight for those domes. Then he raised his razor-sharp weapon and swung. The Goblin General slammed Zeke and Maria's protective domes with a punishing storm of crushing blows, while the rest of the goblins just stood back to watch it all unfold. Maria and Zeke launched into brutal self-destruction, and when they snapped their brows tight, they declared this was the moment to strike. Right after, a blinding flash tore through the air. Then stones and crystals started ramming into the goblins, one after another, and Ike clutched his brand new spear on his shoulder, staring in shock at what Mars was doing. The Goblin General planted himself in place, clutching his wounds with both hands, while Zeke and Maria's attack shattered half his armor and scattered his weapons right down to a battered helmet, and he just stood there, mouth hanging open, eyes blank with shock. Then the Goblin General crumpled onto the ground and went still, while his helmet skidded off to the side along with the rest of his monster crew, all sprawled beside him, dead to the world. Marie gripped a staff in her hands, and Zeke did the same. Then right as the parents turned to their wives, they demanded to know what those kids could truly do when it came to strength. Mars gripped a knife in his hands while Ike swung his brand new spear up proudly, and the guys marched up to their parents with huge smiles, saying they'd done amazing, while Marie clapped a hand over her mouth and giggled shyly. Meanwhile, the sun blazed over Labyrinth Grants, and the whole city was packed with towering multi-story buildings stretching as far as the eye could see. A cat sprang onto the girl's lap and started clawing at her clothes, while she beamed and hugged it tight. Then both of them snapped their heads in shock as a young man came sprinting up, shouting her name. The girl stumbled into one of the city's houses and slipped inside a room packed with beds, where injured men lay groaning in pain. She froze in the doorway, fighting to breathe. The bandaged man sprang up from the bed, his whole body trembling like crazy. He lifted a shaking hand and apologized for the mess, then asked if Clarice could actually treat him, so the girl hurried straight to the injured man. The girl stood in the room, lifted her arms, and shut her eyes. Then a magical glow erupted in her hands, while behind her, a door and a closet packed with odd little items waited in the shadows. The girl flashed a smile, cracked her eyes just a little, and started weaving a healing spell, one pigtail braid swinging with every move. Torches blaze on that gigantic stone wall, and every single brick, every last one looks crystal clear. One of the Goblin Generals burst out of the floor like magic freed by a tricky spell seal, and his buddy lies beside him, staring in total disbelief. Their father says the boys slipped into the Goblin General's room, and even if they kill those creatures, they'll still crawl right back to life again. Tucked behind the boys is a tiny stone bunker where their parents can be seen, so the father leans in and tells them to rack up experience here for the fights to come. While the other parent chimes in with a quick burst of luck, the boys barely even notice. Goblins keep closing in from every side, trying to trap the heroes, but the boys refuse to fold, holding their ground with everything they've got. while the parents in a stone bunker are screaming for the heroes to wipe out every goblin general. At last, the heroes surge forward and choose war against the goblins, eyes blazing with grit. The young fighters stand tall, convinced they'll win, and they won't budge from their plan. Then they nod hard at the commanders calling from the bunker. Goblins. They're not losing not a chance, and their smug confidence practically screams from those ugly faces they're locked in on winning. And outsiders who barge in uninvited won't change that. A white-haired young man charges like a storm, slamming into monsters with zero hesitation, while his friend stays right on his heels, too. Then the two of them hack into goblins without an ounce of mercy, refusing to stop for even a second. Goblins still swarm the heroes, clawing and kicking to guard their exposed spots, so when they hurl the characters off them, it's like tossing helpless rag dolls, dropping from somewhere far too high and falling way too awkwardly. Even after the white-haired hero gets slammed to the ground, he pops back up in a flash, then launches into a leap, blade in hand, ready to cut the goblin down again, even though the enemy towers over him. With the opening in hand, Mars lunges straight for the goblin's neck, the one spot left unprotected, and drives the blade through its flesh with everything he's got. It tears up the monster again and again, day after day, for the entire year. And boom, the dungeon floods with a gigantic mountain of stones, so thick the floor itself vanishes from sight. The heroes stand tall, victorious after that brutal fight. And with it, Mars rockets up to level 14, while Ike's crew hits level 19. When the battle finally dies down, the parents who'd been sitting through it the whole time climb out of their bunker. One of them breaks into praise and tells the heroes they absolutely crushed it, while the other just stands there in silence, saying nothing at all. Then he grins confident, calm, and ready, saying it's time to roll into fresh adventures and training, while his gaze stays locked ahead, hunting out new ground to push into. Then every single character snaps their eyes to the stairs that climb to the third floor. The heroes scramble up, and right when they reach the top, they freeze because what they see blows them away, and every single one of them has their mouths hanging open. They stand before a monstrous gate, slammed shut with a stone goblin head and swirling, intricate patterns that seem to breathe with power. And one of the heroes swears these are the direct roads to the boss's room. Then a gloved hand slams onto the heavy stone gate, and the man digs in his heels, forcing it open with pure, brutal strength. It turns out the gatekeeper is the very father of the young men who fought those goblins in the dungeon. He swings the gate open and shouts that it's time to keep moving. Forward. Now behind him, the heroes sing with iron determination, and they all stare into the dark passage ahead. Next thing they know, they're shoved into the boss's room, this massive space, with a throne sitting at the very end like it owns the place, and two small, intimidating knights posted right by it as someone sits there. As the heroes finally close in, they lock eyes on the knights guarding the throne, blank, furious faces staring back. While their sword hilts are gripped so tight, their knuckles pop. These are the Goblin Lords. At the far end of the room, the Goblin King looms on his throne like he owns the whole world, sneering at every intruder jaw set, eyes blazing, and gripping his sword's hilt tight, just like his guards. Suddenly, rage rips across his face like a storm, his features swallowed by shadow, until all you can see are the stark white eyes. Right now, the heroes' faces twist with raw tension. They've got no clue what the Goblin King is about to unleash, and the white-haired young man is already convinced this goblin can cast spells. Suddenly, the young men snap into battle stances, then whirl to face their parents, their voices blazing with pure determination. When parents heard that sharp edge in their kids' voices, surprise hit them hard. Then tension snapped into place, and they instantly went wary, because they had no idea what their children were up to. The boys snapped into defensive stances, ready to fight monsters like Goblin Lords, and begged their parents to let them handle it, while the Goblin Lords were already gearing up to strike the intruders. So the guys burst forward to smash their opponents, clanking in armor so tough it felt unbreakable, while determination and total confidence burned in their eyes. Then the Goblin Lords surged right after them, bearing the same fearless faces that screamed, "We're not losing to some kids." The guys charged the opponents with pure, unshakable grit, refusing to hand them any chance at victory around them. The only thing you could see was swords flashing through the chaos, and the air kept screaming with each brutal slice through monster flesh, while their parents just stood there, utterly frozen in shock. The guys tore through the Goblin Lords in a flash, then the bodies hit the floor, lifeless, and done so They rushed off to take on the dungeon's boss next, but he'd seen this coming, and before anyone could blink, he charged straight at his little opponents, grinning like the devil as he swung his blade to split the heroes in two, but they weren't about to let that happen. So one brother snapped out of the Goblin King's strike, and the other slammed him back. Right as the blow was being deflected, the young man's face didn't even show grit or fear against the goblin's power. Then the opponents scatter across the room, slashing the distance between them into pieces, doing the stunt in midair, so every landing detonates with loud, thunderous noise. Then the heroes scattered, eyeing each other like traps. Neither of them ever let his sword drop, because they weren't about to blink and give an opening. The cut the boys had just landed on the Goblin King sealed up in a blink, and a soft, quiet hiss filled the room as his body regenerated instantly, while the goblin just sat there, calm and waiting for it to finish. Then, right after it finally worked, he flashed a nasty, smug smile at his opponents, like he was proving a point, and his wound healed so perfectly that the sword's hit left not a single scar. Then the brawl kept raging. Our heroes slammed forward like the Goblin King's own shadow. Spears and swords clutched tight, and they rammed into the enemy to land the hardest blows possible. At last, a real brutal brawl erupted. Swords and spears screamed as they smashed into each other, sparks flying midair while both sides scrambled to land hits without taking a single one. The Goblin King moved to hit one of the brothers with a sneaky strike. His face twisted with venom and contempt as he set up a brutal blow meant to knock his head clean off. Right then, the second brother snapped into action. He caught that crushing blow and yanked his brother back from death, then somehow clamped the Goblin King's massive sword in his tiny blade. Right then, the second brother slipped under the goblin's blade and carried out the move they planned. Right when the goblin finally swung the door open, the young man hurled his spear like a last-second miracle, and it nailed the Goblin King dead on, punching straight through his side. The king froze, stunned by the strange foreign things now lodged in his body. Then the Goblin King yanked the spear that one of the brothers had driven into him, clamping his arm down hard on it and straining like crazy to wrench it free from his own flesh. As the Goblin King yanked him away, he snapped to attention and drove his sword into one of his enemies. Then the goblin with the nasty grin started fishing the blade from behind his back. Then he lunged in and swung at one of the brothers, pushing for his life to end all over again. With that move, he instantly shocked the young man, and terror hit him hard. A split second before the goblin's blade would have carved into him, the young man snapped aside and sprang back, saving himself from getting cut. Then the Goblin King's sword slammed into the dungeon stone with a brutal, echoing clang. Seeing the picture, his parents bolted toward their son when they screamed his name. It sounded like panic itself, because they'd just watched him slip away. Meanwhile, Ike stayed planted on one knee, clutching the wound on his forearm like it might open again. Then he shot his parents an awkward look, guilt punching his chest for worrying them, told them he was fine, and apologized for letting his guard slip while still gripping his injured hand. Right when his brother is distracted and yells to Ike that he's about to fly up to him, the Goblin King slips in behind him, sword already swinging, closing in to smash Mars before he even knows what hit him. But right in the nick of time, he spots the Goblin King's blade streaking at him, and panic slams his eyes wide as his body seems stuck in fear. Yet somehow he twists aside and dodges the hit. He darts straight beneath the Goblin King's blade swings whistling over his head, yet not a single cut finds its mark. After dodging, Mars whips around to face the enemy and vows he'll stop him from healing his brother. Then the hero's expression twists with pure, unmistakable disgust. Then Mars charges the Goblin King by himself, no backup, just pure grit, his face set with fierce determination, and he thrusts his tiny blade forward like he's daring the monster to come at him. Goblin only feels relieved by how it turned out. Pure excitement flares in his eyes. Then he thrusts his massive sword forward like a warning, because that monster is gearing up to strike its opponent again. Then the battle keeps raging. Each opponent slams into the other again and again, desperate to leave permanent damage, and as they clash, they keep shifting around the room so the fight never stays in one spot for a second. Over time, the hero starts getting overwhelmed. Every hit from the Goblin King feels heavier, harder to block, and written all over his face as exhaustion settles in still. He fights to keep every goblin blow off him, desperately trying to deflect them. But then he snaps under the pressure and slams straight into the wall, getting dropped because a goblin sword strike is too much for him, and the brutal impact blasts through the whole room. The hero somehow clings to life, completely unhurt, and crouches on the wall like a smug lizard, watching every move the goblin makes below. The goblin keeps grinding away with his massive sword, just waiting for Mars to drop in and finish the fight. Suddenly, the hero thrusts the sword blade forward, kicks off the wall, and charges straight at the opponent. The goblin had been waiting for this moment. He thrust his sword forward like a blade about to strike, grinned with nasty glee, and got so lost in the thrill he practically counted his win because really only some kid stood in his way. The boy rockets toward the enemy at full speed, hell-bent on dealing damage so brutal it can't be undone, and he's chasing revenge too, because the Goblin King hurt his brother and stole the chance to let him heal. The boy closes in on the enemy with every heartbeat. Then they collide, trading swings, trying to knock each other out for good. As soon as they're close enough to feel each other's breath, the hero and the goblin explode into full-on combat, trading blows like their lives depend on it. After that swing, the goblin whiffs completely, didn't even graze the hero, who just barely dodged out of the way, while Mars slams the Goblin King's leg with the heaviest strike he can muster. The boy pulls off that move, and it rattles the ladder so hard, he's stunned, almost scared, and the hero keeps charging forward, smashing into the enemy without slowing down. This time, he slams his blade into the Goblin King's throat and actually severs it clean. Then the king clamps onto his throat, hurls him off Mars, and tries to create as much distance as possible. Then the Goblin King hurls down magic and forges a brutal seal, and with it, he dares the monsters who come exploding out in one massive swarming crowd from that sealed mark on the floor. But the hero instantly knew the answer, so he unleashed a massive blast of air, whipping it into a twisted horizontal tornado, so the hero cut through every last monster the Goblin King threw at him like it was nothing, and the moment the Goblin King saw it, he froze in pure shock, because he couldn't figure out how this kid could survive an entire army. Mars strode forward, blade angled just slightly ahead of him, and then boom, every sound vanished, as if the whole room swallowed it whole, leaving only stone walls, a stone floor, and the tense stillness between them. With a sweet, childish grin, the hero thrust his blade toward the opponent and calmly said the words that made it look like the Goblin King had burned every last drop of mana. With one quick slash, the hero severed the Goblin King's head from its body. An eerie metallic ring echoed through the room as the monster's head slowly toppled to the floor. Then the hero stared at a blazing sign that crowned him as the King of the Wind, an honor reserved for the top 10 wind mages on Earth. And it didn't stop there, because he was also tagged with the title of Goblins. Then right in front of the hero, a chest bursts open, out shoots the mantle of the Isekai'D, huge and totally weird-looking. Then the parents and his brother rush up to Mars. Mom scoops him into a hug and gushes that he's such a big, smart guy, while Dad stands right behind them, proud as ever, saying they can count it. The two of them just cleared the dungeon. Mars bursts in and tells his father, "I got the Goblin Killer Wind King." His dad stares at him, stunned and bursting with joy, then blurts out, "That's just wonderful, it's amazing." The next day kicks in inside Grantham's Maze City, and the sun blasts overhead, turning the streets bright and weirdly warm, like the world's daring them to keep going. Inside one cozy house, a mom, a dad, and their daughter share breakfast in a warm, friendly room that feels like pure family comfort. Mom leans in and asks Clarissa if she'll go today, and her dad warns her not to push herself too hard because they're all watching their daughter with pure love. The girl flashes a sweet smile at her parents and swears she'll never push herself too hard, and just like that, you can feel idle running this family, because everyone here treats each other with respect, love, and warmth. Then Clarissa heads into the city for the business she has to handle, and she tells her parents with a bright, reassuring smile so they won't worry while she's away. The action shifts to a whole new building, massive, open, and bursting with space. It's a 2-story house packed with windows everywhere. The girl steps into the house and shoots her hand toward someone's injured body, casting a healing spell on the spot. Then a blazing ball of light erupts from her fingers and races straight to the exact sore spot she's pointing at. The man Clarissa just treated beams at her, thanking her with a warm smile, while Clarissa's patient keeps working and insists he has nothing to be grateful for at all, her face locked in serious, focused concentration. After Clarissa finishes treating the man, she snaps her attention forward and calls the next patient over, though you can tell she's running on fumes from just one case, brushing sweat off her small forehead like it's the weight of the whole day. Clarissa can't stop thinking that she's had way too many patients lately, and as the clock ticks on, darkness starts creeping in slowly, surely while the sun sinks below the horizon and evening takes over. By the time Clarissa finishes, the sun is nearly kissing the horizon and the city starts sliding into a deep, cozy night darkness. The moment she's done, she heads home and right then, two men close in chatting about the cobalt return from the morning. One drops the news and the other presses them for the straight truth. Was it real or just talk? The girl brushes past them until one of the men blurts out that he doesn't think the maze's saturation is even worth worrying about. Then Clarissa's face instantly twists into confusion and total bewilderment. So the girl whips around to eavesdrop, catching two men talking, one pressing the other for details on how saturated the maze is. Then the girl strides up to this massive, strikingly similar building. Towering columns frame the entrance, and the whole facade screams the same design while thick steam billows out of the windows like the place is breathing. The girl freezes in shock at those towering windows because thick, scorching steam is blasting out like a furnace. Then she steps in closer, and before she can second-guess herself, she decides to go inside the building for real. The building turns out to be one giant bathhouse, and Clarissa finally caves, dropping into the hot tub and melting into pure relief as the heat soaks every tired muscle and she exhales like the world's been lifted off her shoulders. Right next to her, a bunch of other girls lounge in the bathtub too, showing up like Clarissa just to unwind, scrub down, and soak in the warm water while they drift and swim in peace. And meanwhile, out in the hall, some people stroll past the bathroom, picking a new way to spend their time. Clarissa beams with pure joy, savoring how amazing she feels right this second, while the bathroom's steaming heat kisses her cheeks, leaving her totally relaxed, body and soul. Then the girl sinks back into the hot, finally earned bath, letting the steaming water wrap her whole body, while the stone walls, heated through by that endless heat, never cool down a single bit. Like she's lost in a dream, the girl slowly peels her eyes open. Pure calm washes over her face, peaceful as a soft breath. Then the girl dives into the water until it reaches her chin and starts blowing bubbles, talking through it about how saturated the maze is, while Clarissa hears that news and panic won't let her stop thinking about it. Then she can't help but pray that the ending won't turn into disaster, and the bathhouse life keeps rolling on like nothing ever happened. Clarissa finishes her water treatments, steps out of the bathhouse, and finally heads home, because once she's out on the street, she can't stop thinking about how great she feels now. Suddenly, the girl's eyes snap to a cat, and the moment that fluffy little troublemaker grabs her attention, Clarissa stares so hard, her eyes practically glitter like stars. She rushes right up to the cat, starts stroking it with gentle hands, and the moment she touches it, the cat purrs like it's in heaven. Clarissa keeps petting it, smiling nonstop. The mission gets put on hold, and a man leans in to tell Clarissa the maze's monster count is supposed to be fixed, so why do the bodies keep piling up, packed in tighter and tighter until the place hits saturation, like the maze can't hold anymore. Then he leans in and quizzes Clarissa. Got it what the maze's saturation is? And right as he asks, his face turns deadly serious, arms locked tight across his chest. Clarissa stares at him, totally baffled, and blurts out that she understands everything. But the second you catch her face, you know she's missing parts, because it's clear she didn't get the whole story. Then she admits she only grasped it just partially, and all through their intense conversation, they stayed posted on the tiny veranda of the local diner, while the other guests quietly kept eating. Then the man flashes a friendly smile and tells you not to stress, saying this almost never happens, while the long blonde-haired guy beside him just sits there, smiling in total calm. Right then, a waiter swoops in with ice cream, drops it at their table, and the man urges Clarissa to dig in with gratitude because that sweet looks gorgeous. And even better, it smells like pure delicious trouble. The moment she spotted the dessert, her face lit up with pure joy, and you could see the awe shining hard in her eyes. Then she grabbed a spoon and finally dove into that long-awaited dessert. One bite of ice cream hit, and pure, electrifying delight lit up her face. Then the action slams to the maze gates, where a man with jet-black hair barks at his subordinates. "You're coming too. Today we hunt monsters, so the maze doesn't get swamped." The man declares they're Count Beetle's nightly order, so they'll fight for the common people and for the Count, while his face locks into total seriousness, like every word he says is solid gold. The knights lean in, hanging on every word, and then they all nod like they've just heard the battle plan of a lifetime, each one braced in heavy armor, gripping a long, brutal spear made to tear monsters apart. Suddenly, the maze gate shudders and rattles, and the crowd goes wide-eyed with shock as the soldiers stare at the violently shaking gates, utterly stunned. Their leader snaps around toward the soldiers, his face twisted in pure confusion because he'd never once seen the gates of the labyrinth tremble like that. He steps closer, desperate to figure out why those giant gates inside the stone wall are trembling so hard, and the shaking plus those weird pounding sounds only get louder. Suddenly, the gate blasts open, and a flood of massive maze monsters storms out, their ugly faces twisted with pure malice and fury as they charge in to smash anything and everything standing in their way. The leader of the Knightly Order of Count Beetle stares in total shock, utterly clueless as a relentless wave of monsters barrels straight toward him, and fear spreads across his face like he's about to be swallowed whole. Then it basically happens like this. An enormous, ruthless wave of monsters pours out of the maze and crashes straight onto the order of Count Beetle's leader, and he erupts in a scream as he desperately tries to fend off the unstoppable pack. Monsters keep piling onto him while he screams for his men to stay fearless, yet his own body trembles, terror roaring through him as he's slowly devoured alive. Even so, he screams at the soldiers to hold their formation and keep those monsters out of the city, while the knights fight tooth and nail trying to restrain the swarm just to keep the peace inside. Right now, a bell ringer bolts up to the observation tower. He only meant to peek outside the city, but then a horrifying sight smashes into his eyes. The moment he spotted what was going down outside the city walls, terror slammed into him so hard, his hands went numb. Cold sweat broke across his face, and fear nearly froze him in place. As everything spiraled around him, one thought slammed into his head. This is trouble, and it's happening right now. He bolted to the bell and started hammering it like crazy, shouting that a disaster had struck, while at the same time he ran door to door, warning everyone the maze had been flooded and that they had to evacuate right now. The moment the townspeople heard that, panic detonated through the streets, and they sprinted away in terror, anything to save their lives. The story jumps back to Clarissa and her crew. Then the big man, mid-explanation about how the maze works, suddenly freezes because something looks horribly wrong. And the moment his companion sees it too, he snaps upright, ready to throw down. Then they rush to the accident site, already having told Clarissa to go home right now. This girl stares straight into the distance, jaw set, and worries her parents might be in danger right this second. Suddenly, she hears someone nearby is a wounded adventurer, and the person next to him yells, demanding to know if anyone close can help. The girl drops her head, panicking over one terrifying question: save the wounded or run for safety, straight back to her own home. The choice hits like a wall. Clarissa can't decide, so she clutches her chest with a hard fist, fingers tight as her nerves scream. Then she snaps into action. She races straight to the wounded, fighting to save every injured life. And as she barrels toward that adventurer, she yells, "I can help you!" Inside the city walls, the fight is already raging. Monsters have slipped out of the maze and crash into the streets, but the man who spoke with Clarissa is handling the swarm with zero trouble. His companion keeps pace beside him, and right as Deathly swats away the monsters, each one gets cut down with a single clean slash. And on top of that, other folks in the city jump in too. People who can actually fight, and who've been in enough battles to know what to do. Clarissa rushed to the wounded, firing off, "Are you okay?" and using her healing power to help anyone who needed saving. Suddenly, a mustached man snapped his head around to a voice he knew. Then gratitude spilled behind him. Clarissa was rushing in to help the injured, and the line of people waiting for treatment stretched almost the whole way. The moment he saw it, duty surged through him, and with a menacing grin, he slammed his massive fists together, ready to fight harder than ever. He stared down his opponents like a warning, then told his comrades, "If a little girl can grind that hard, then we absolutely can't drop the ball." His comrades were all fully on board. The monsters that broke out of the maze aren't backing down rage, and a hungry thirst for human blood still blaze across their faces. and one of them is fuming even harder than the rest. The fight rages on. People are battling the maze's monsters, and those monsters are still clawing their way deeper into the city, hunting innocent lives and civilians without mercy. Suddenly, from the far side of the city, a huge crowd comes sprinting toward the monster versus people chaos, lugging supplies and pushing hard to evacuate, while the bell ringer leads the charge, the same one who slammed the beginning of the monster attack into the world. When they finally reach the central square, he stares at an insane picture straight ahead, and the bell ringer's shocked, terrified face screams that he can't believe it either, because even he never thought he'd ever witness something like this. In the square, people and monsters were locked in a brutal fight. Goblins clamped down on everyone and smothered them head to toe until the townsfolk sprinted in, staring in total shock, and one of them even blurted, like it was the most painfully obvious thing ever, "There's an army of monsters here too." After what they saw, the citizens snapped into action and flipped their evacuation route, then sprinted away from the monster pack, tearing through helpless people, with raw terror and horror plastered across every face. At one moment, a wave of citizens sprinted toward where Clarissa's companions were locked in battle, and the mustached man whipped around at the screams behind him. There were monsters there too, plus desperate cries for help. Then the man shouted to his comrades that he'd stay right here, holding the monster horde back from the maze while they sprinted toward the screams to help, because the moment he said it, pure seriousness hardened his face. While he rallied his comrades, trouble was igniting in every direction right where the bell ringer had sounded the alarm and forced the residents to evacuate, but now he had no idea what to do next. Right then, he slammed his feet into the ground, fighting off his terror of what was coming, and the crushing monster pressure closing in from every side on him and his comrades. Then the bell ringer stormed forward, slammed his own chest with a savage punch, and bellowed a battle cry, rage and grit blazing in his eyes because he refused to watch the city he loves get swallowed by monsters. He roars at his comrades that survival is the only option left. Fight back, stand your ground, and hold the line to the bitter end to protect both yourselves and their city. The focus snaps to Clarissa. She's still working to heal the wounded, hands steady even as the screams nearby claw at the air. Monsters are getting too close, but help is already on the way. Clarissa, meanwhile, focuses on another wounded guy her team is tending until out of nowhere, she hears someone from her side call her name. She snaps her gaze away and hunts the sound source, scanning the space around her like it's about to bite. Turns out it was the girl's parents. Clarissa spotted them instantly, and her father's injured. His mother had to grip his arm and guide him, and the moment Clarissa saw that, she bolted straight to them. She pushed right up to her father and begged him to wait. "I'll heal you," she said, trembling with fear and non-stop worry in her eyes, ready to start treating him at once. But then her father steps in, calmly, his hand soft on hers, and tells her to keep treating the adventurers. Still, sweat pours down his face, and you can tell how painfully hard it is for him. Right now, the girl gets surrounded wounded, broken adventurers, and scared city residents alike, while everyone starts yelling that she has to heal them first. Some even corner the girl and claim their wounds are worse, pushing her to heal them first, then a few go so far as to fake pain themselves. The crowd of sick folks around Clarissa just keeps swelling, and each one yanks their blanket up tight, refusing to wait. People shove and trade places, desperate to be the first one cured. Right in the middle of all that chaos, a voice slices through the noise. "Move, clear the way." And everyone instantly spots a tiny man dressed in luxury so expensive it practically screams status. So it turned out this guy was born into an aristocrat's bloodline, and he stared down Clarissa with pure arrogance before declaring cold and unshakable that the aristocrat should be taken care of first, like there wasn't a single doubt in his bones. Then he closed the distance to Clarissa, tugged up the sleeve of his smart suit, and revealed that nasty little scrape on his elbow, then barked at her in a no-nonsense tone to heal him ASAP. Clarissa didn't expect that kind of arrogance. Then she blinked in shock when even a tiny scratch an aristocrat called serious, and she just stared at the man's elbow. Then she spoke up cool as ice, telling the aristocrat, "It's just a bruise on his elbow." The same man stared at the girl, baffled and dead serious, completely unable to grasp what the fuss was about. Clarissa nodded her goodbye and promised she'd fix the man's elbow a little later because she could tell his injury wasn't serious enough to stop her right now when there were way more critical cases all around. At the same time, she made it clear right now, saving adventurers who can actually fight back is all that matters, since the labyrinth monsters smashed into her hometown and her beloved city, and an awkward, polite smile flickered across her face. But the aristocrat couldn't stand her answer. He snapped his hand out and slapped her across the face, furious that she'd shown him no respect for his rank. The punch snapped her head sideways, and on her face, pure confusion, she couldn't even figure out why someone had just slapped her. When the girl's parents saw that picture, they went completely pale because they never in a million years thought a high society man would actually dare to punch their daughter after she refused to treat his bruise. The rest of the townspeople flooded in, stunned out of their minds, because nobody saw an aristocrat doing something this cruel, especially while the city was already under attack by monsters. The girl clutched her stinging cheek and gawked at the man who'd struck her for basically nothing. Totally stunned and still not able to make sense of it. And it still didn't feel like enough, so he kept swinging his rage at Clarissa, yelling at the girl, demanding to know if she was joking. Then the aristocrat lunges forward and swings his sword at the girl, ready to land a brutal hit, yelling that Clarissa should be executed for humiliating him while his blade rushes toward her, and she just stands there, bracing for her fate. Clarissa braces herself for the man's sword to crash down, yet it never comes, so she snaps her eyes open. The girl snaps to it. She's being squeezed in a tight hug while her parents shield her at the same time, and her eyes go wide with shock because she never saw it coming. Meanwhile, the aristocrat just freezes, totally baffled about what's happening. Suddenly, Clarissa lets out a blood-curdling scream. An aristocrat has done something to her dad, and the truth hits her when she sees his face twisted by pain so unbearable it feels impossible. There's still an aristocrat lurking behind the family, and rage burns in his chest. He can't believe the girl's parents didn't stop him from punishing Clarissa for the audacity he swears she showed. A nasty deep gash rips across the girl's father's back. The aristocrat's sword carved it into him, and even while the pain screams, Clarissa's father forces himself to face that man and begs him to forgive his daughter. You can see it in the man's face. Every step costs him everything, but he refuses to stop, forces himself back up, and demands the aristocrat forgive his daughter. Clarissa and her mother bolt straight to his side, because he's so weak he can't even stand on his own anymore. The girl wastes no time and starts working on her father's back wound, pushing to get it healed right away, while her mother sits beside her sobbing, helpless, and staring at this nightmare like she has no idea what to do. The girl keeps pouring magic into her father's wound, and his healing finally starts to take hold. Then, out of nowhere, the regeneration on his back starts to crawl to a stop. The girl realizes she can't do a single thing right now. She's completely out of mana, and she needs it more than ever, so the shock hits her hard, and tears spill from her eyes. An aristocrat doesn't even flinch as Clarissa's father risks his life right before her eyes. He's only furious about his honor, grabs his sword again, and declares the family's punishment will be a death sentence. The aristocrat is ready to end a mother and her daughter's lives. Then he starts lowering his sword toward them and demands they leave this mortal world and repent right now. It felt like Clarissa's family was doomed for good, like the world had already given up on her because her comrades were stuck battling monsters that had burst out of the maze, and none of them could see what was happening to Clarissa right now. The crowd of citizens swarmed around them, but they couldn't do a thing. Some trembled at the aristocrat's terrifying status, while others were so badly hurt they couldn't even fight back. So now it's just mother and daughter left to fight for their survival because that aristocrat is dead set on ending their lives. Then out of nowhere, strange sounds smash into his ears and he can't even tell where they're coming from when he finally spots what's causing it. His whole face flips in an instant and pure gut punch shock takes over. Right then, someone yanked those aristocrats by the chin and hauled him up with brutal force so hard, his face twisted in a raw, painful grimace. Then it turned out he was Mars. With one easy shove, he blasted the evil aristocrat off the mother and daughter and away from the unconscious father, and the aristocrat sailed through the air like a rocket into the sky. Clarissa and her mother stared at the hero in shock, stunned that such a tiny kid could beat an adult man, especially since he wasn't some towering giant at all. As the action kicked off, Mars's face hardened into total focus pure, razor-straight seriousness, while contempt burned in his eyes toward that aristocrat and the cruel plans he had for the helpless family. Clarissa, her mother, and the whole town just keep gaping at Mars in disbelief, like their shock has no brakes, because nobody ever thought anyone would actually come to help. Then Mars slid over to Clarissa and her mother, where her father lay unconscious, and nearby, right by them, the aristocrat the young man beat was down and out too. Mars hurried over, grabbed the sword lying beside the wounded man, then pressed his palm to Clarissa's father's forehead and unleashed a healing spell right as the man jolted and winced from the painful relief. Then Clarissa's father finally dozes off peacefully, and Mars watches him with a smug grin, sword in hand, lifted right from beside him. Then he snaps his focus back to the unconscious aristocrat sprawled nearby, the same guy the young man had just launched, flying. Then Mars grips his sword and declares it's time to smash the goblins, then finally sort everything out with the aristocrat, and the battle fever starts to blaze right in his eyes. Monsters from the maze kept smashing their way onto the city streets, and every block turned into a battlefield, combatants everywhere, injuries piling higher by the minute, and panic roaring non-stop until, out of nowhere, everything went dead silent. Every townsfolk froze, staring hard at the sudden picture that flashed into view, their faces packed with pure shock, unable to wrap their minds around what was happening right in front of them. Clarissa's companions stumbled in, utterly stunned, their faces blank with disbelief at what they were watching unfold, until the mustached man actually dropped his jaw, frozen in shock like he couldn't even process it. Clarissa, meanwhile, was totally captivated. She couldn't stop staring at the boy, who showed up right on time, sending an aristocrat who wanted her whole family dead straight into unconsciousness. But that wasn't what the girl truly admired. She stared in shock as Mars, totally alone, carved through every goblin with barely any effort, wielding nothing but a sword. Then right behind him piled up a whole mass of dead maze monsters. He tore through the city's attackers, wiped out the monsters, and then stood there, chest out, soaking in the aftermath, watching the locals like a proud hero. Even when he disarmed an aristocrat or fought the labyrinth's monsters, not a single muscle twitched on his face. Suddenly, Mars snapped his head around. Screams of gratitude and reverence erupted behind him, and the hero froze, awkward as could be, not sure what to do with all that praise as he stared at the citizens in confused silence. Suddenly, thundering hoofbeats erupted in the distance. Horsemen were closing in fast, and at the front of the formation rode a squad leader on a snow-white horse. The knights closed in on the scene, and those hoofbeats thundered louder with every heartbeat, while the squad leader's long hair whipped in the wind, just like the horses' tails. The townspeople erupted into cheers as the knights rode in, and the rider pushed through a few slightly ruined streets like a spark of hope, right when the locals needed one most. Right when everything was about to happen, the hero got yanked by the hand and dragged sideways over and over again, because her grip was tiny and fragile, yet she wouldn't stop pulling him exactly where she wanted. Turns out the owner of that hand was Clarissa right there. She fixed the hero with a hard stare and said there was one last thing to handle, so Mars had to come with her. Mars blinked in shock at the girl, completely clueless about what she was after. By then, a squad of knights had already ridden into the crowd, and their leaders, after grilling everyone they could, started firing questions about what happened, including exactly how many were hurt after the labyrinth monster's attack. Right then, an aristocrat snapped awake from a dream, furious enough to wipe out Clarissa first and then slaughter her whole family, all because they refused to tend the bruise on his elbow. And the second he finished ranting, he swung around to Count Beetle, the knight's commander, and demanded action. The man quickly flashed his bruised elbow and claimed it was a real injury, insisting he'd been attacked and left wounded. Then he demanded the Count put him first in line to be cured. The Count only shot back that an aristocrat's bruises could be shrugged off one last time, and that, first and foremost, it was time to treat badly wounded adventurers and everyday citizens like they mattered. The aristocrat stared back at him in total disbelief. Then the man snapped with rage and started yelling that he was an aristocrat, so of course he should be treated first, and the fury and confusion on his face screamed like he'd just been compared to trash. With indignation blazing, Count Beetle snapped that Baron Ladies needed to be silenced. Right now, his face twisted in pure disgust, while a fierce rage burned because Baron Ladies had dared to use his position for nothing but selfish schemes. When the Count snapped at him like that, the Baron froze, pure shock ripping through him because he'd never expected to be yelled at, let alone ordered to shut up, especially after he'd been basking in his power while everyone stayed too afraid to challenge him. Then irritation flared across the Baron's face, and he snapped that all of this was because some nobody managed to rattle his place in society and in the citizens' eyes. Right then, the mighty Baron ladies looked just like a small kid. Then the story slides onto the city's quiet streets, peaceful, almost eerie. The monsters' lifeless bodies were already gone from the maze. The sun blazed overhead, and all the nightmares were finished. Mars was thanked. Clarissa herself, along with her family, stood there, heads bowed in pure gratitude for pulling them through that nightmare. But Mars shook his head and said there was nothing to thank him for, because he hadn't done anything special at all. Clarissa's father stared at the hero, smiling, and admitted that this young guy, tiny in age, was still blasting them away with how strong he already was. Clarissa glanced at Mars. Sure, he was basically her age, but completely stunned by the fact that he hit way harder than she ever could. Then she leans in and studies the hero's face, thoughtfulness and suspicion flickering there at once, because Mars's look and power just don't add up, and it's driving her crazy trying to figure out why. Then she strides toward the hero right as a wild, impossible thought slams into her mind. Weirdly obvious all the same, and she's left wondering if she just made the worst choice. Then the girl takes one step toward the hero and thanks him again for everything he's done, her expression turning serious but still glowing with real gratitude and a little humble awe. But then the girl blurts out, "Thank you!" For the third time, this time she means it. Her face lights up with a real, happy smile, and she awkwardly presses her small, fragile hand to her chest, like her heart just can't help it. Hearing her thanks, the hero snaps to a halt because she's speaking Japanese. His own language and surprise slams into him like a punch, followed by a jolt of alarm he can't ignore because he never once thought he'd hear his native tongue in this world. He remembers everything, especially her. His girlfriend who died in that far-off past, and wonders if, just like him, his dear friend could also be reborn in this world. When the hero weighs that chance in his head, his face first flickers with shock and total confusion because it feels nearly impossible for it to actually come true. And then, right in that moment, a bright, happy smile bursts across his face. Then Mars locks eyes with Clarissa, bursting with happiness and pure relief, and tells her he can't believe it. He's so glad it worked out, because he never once thought this could actually happen, and his joy hits maximum the moment it does. Then he shuffles toward Clarissa, his body betraying him step by step, like his legs have stolen the choice from him, while she walks right up to the hero too, fearless, ready to show him exactly what she's really feeling. Mars and Clarissa slam into a loving hug, locking eyes like everything suddenly makes perfect sense right there between them. From the outside, they look exactly like a couple who's been apart for years, yet still burns with the same love. Then the hero leans in and drops his real origin, "I'm Fujisaki Yuto." He claims that back in his past life he was 20, but here in this world, he's Mars Bryant, and he's only 7. Clarissa tells us that before all this, her name was Aoi Ayanokoji. She was 20 years old back then, but in this world she's only 7 now, and she goes by Clarissa. Clarissa's parents stare at the picture, totally baffled, like they can't even grasp what's happening or when that spark first sparked between those characters, because the man and the woman just watch the children in complete, stunned confusion. Mars spots it just in time and yanks away from Clarissa before he can rattle his parents anymore, but they just freeze there, staring like statues. They still can't figure out when those two went from strangers to friends. Clarissa has no clue why Mars just pulled away from her. She totally forgets that. Besides the two of them, her current parents are standing right there on the street, and they stumble forward in pure, shocked confusion at what they're seeing. Then the hero drops to them and begs for forgiveness, admitting he was only thrown off a bit. "By the way, I'm Mars." Clarissa's father nods like he gets it, then steps in too. "I'm Grey Rampart." His wife smiles. "I'm Arena." And the girl straight up reintroduces herself to the hero. "I'm Clarissa." Grey Rampart cuts through the awkward silence and asks Mars if he's got a free minute. Then turns out, yep, the hero's got time. Then the story zooms straight to Clarissa's house, clean, polished, and almost painfully beautiful from the outside. Right there, Clarissa's family gets hit with shocking news. Mars has finally arrived in their city, sent straight from the kingdom of Barcus. Then Clarissa's father drops the next bomb. Mars is now in Grantham, the labyrinth city sitting in the eastern side of the kingdom of Zarkam. Then the man demands, "How did you get here?" And the hero admits, "Me and my brother Ike crawled through the maze. Then the monsters broke out afterward." We jump into Mars's memories, him and his brother trapped in the maze until he remembers one room where he spotted a wall leaking raw magical power, and the moment he sensed it, he ran back and warned Ike. Then the brothers couldn't resist it. Magic was pouring out of that stone wall, and Mars even managed to slip his hand inside and feel something stirring between the rocks. As Mars shoved his hand into the wall, it started to pull back, yanking so hard he couldn't rip it free, so the hero snapped and decided to push straight through the wall instead, and he told his brother right away. Mars also promised Ike he'd carry a crystal that would let him pinpoint his location, and to prove it, the hero showed his brother the stone right there, yet Ike's eyes didn't stop scanning for danger. Then Mars started sinking deeper into the wall fast, so he blurted to his brother, "Pick me up now!" And with that awkward, embarrassed, slightly terrified grin plastered across his face, he kept going under, deeper and deeper. Then he snapped at the still confused and furious Ike to make sure he told his father about what happened, while Ike kept glaring at his brother, and his brother kept diving deeper into the unknown. Right after the hero got yanked out of the wall to the other side, he blinked and realized he was in the labyrinth city. Totally caught off guard because there was no way he could have seen this coming, only to find he wasn't actually inside, but perched near it on a tiny rock ledge. The story flips right back to Clarissa's house. Her parents lean in, listening to the hero like their lives depend on it. And you can see the shock hit them hard because they never dreamed Mars would land in their city in such a wild, unexpected way. Clarissa's father drops the bombshell that their kingdoms are at war, and the second he says it, his face hardens into pure seriousness, like he never wanted that memory to crawl back up. Right then, a warm smile returns to his face. He tells Mars to stay with them for now, and his wife beside him nods right along. These folks don't mind guests in the slightest, and especially not Mars, the very guy who saved their family from execution. Just then, Clarissa's mother steps into the conversation, beams at Mars, and tells him they're ready to welcome him with open arms. Her warm, genuine smile says she has absolutely no problem with the hero staying. The hero dips his head in gratitude, thanks the homeowners for their kindness, and admits that this help will mean everything, because in this strange new city, he's been left alone with only Clarissa's family as the one familiar face he has. Suddenly, Clarissa snaps her attention forward, turning to her father and speaking up too. Even when she says "Dad," her voice carries a clear, burning request, and you can tell right then she's about to ask him for something. With that, the girl looked her father in the eyes and begged to talk to Mars alone. Clarissa flashed a glowing smile as she asked, like she knew this moment with the hero could change everything. Mars heard her request, slid into the seat opposite her with the biggest grin he could manage because Clarissa had finally remembered his new name, and the happiness hit so hard that his face flushed, whether it was pure embarrassment or overwhelming joy. Her father whipped around with a warm, good-natured grin and said yes to Clarissa's request. Only he had no clue what she planned to tell Mars, and it honestly felt like listening to two 7-year-olds trying to talk their way through the universe. But when Clarissa spoke up again, the man's face flickered with a quick question and a tiny, awkward misunderstanding, like her daughter's voice had gotten a little too secretive, and that was enough to make him go on high alert. Then Clarissa yanked Mars into her room for a private talk, leaving Mars and his father totally baffled, especially when his father immediately asked why they couldn't just talk right there in the kitchen. We jump straight into Clarissa's room, small-ish, not cramped, but just right. Her clothes hang tidy on the hanger, and her costume is neatly ironed and set apart from everything else. They're all crammed onto Clarissa's tiny bed, side by side, and Clarissa leans in and asks Mars what he saw right at the head of the bed. The hero's sword is propped upright against the wall, waiting. Then the characters lock eyes, and Mars kicks off his story about what he witnessed after he got his life stolen away, while the girl listens in complete silence, wearing the most serious look on that sweet little face. The hero explains how he finally met the demigod, how that demigod sent him into this world as a rebirth, and then reveals the real kicker: the demigod's spell hit the three of them. And that's exactly why everything went down. After hearing the hero out, Clarissa realizes the robber who stole their lives has been reborn too, so she warns them to keep their mouths shut and never speak Japanese in public again. Then out of nowhere, a creepy sound crawls up from the street. Every nerve screams danger, and the heroes instantly bolt toward the window. Leaning out the window, Clarissa and Mars spot a tight group of armored soldiers marching through the city streets toward the same destination, and the hero instantly snaps that the goblins have struck again. Suddenly, the girl grabs Mars's hand and yanks him away from the window, and the hero just stares at Clarissa, utterly baffled. That face looked deadly serious, like sorrow had teeth, and the hero instantly knew exactly what it meant. First, shock wipes across his face. He's completely lost for words. Then, like a breath of relief, a warm, good-hearted smile blooms and steadies him. He spins toward the girl and promises he'll come charging to their aid. Those words punch through the air. The girl jerks her head up in shock, not even thinking of letting him go. Sudden shock flashes across her face, and Clarissa immediately starts yelling at the hero, telling him he's from a hostile country, which means he could end up taken into custody at best and executed at worst. Hearing those words, Mars snaps his shoulders back, declaring that people are the same everywhere, and the certainty in his eyes practically glows as if his conviction is bulletproof. Then he locks eyes with the girl and promises he'll protect everyone, including Clarissa. The moment she hears it, heat rushes into her face, and she stares at the hero in pure shock, because she never in a million years expected him to say something like that. Then Clarissa barrels up to the hero and clamps him in a tight hug, and he stumbles back in shock before pulling her into a hug right back. Clarissa hangs onto the hero with all her strength and blurts out a heartfelt thank you for his courage and his willingness to step in and help. Right as the hero steps out of Clarissa's room with a sword slung over his shoulder, her parents have already surged up to the door, and they stare at him, stunned. Then Clarissa's father snaps that the goblins are back again, and he keeps staring at Mars, stunned, like he can't believe what he's seeing. With a grin on his face, the hero promises he'll rush to the labyrinth city to rescue the soldiers and tear into the goblins to save them. The girl's father glares at Mars with pure worry and demands, "Are you really sure?" Because he's terrified of what'll happen the moment they learn their hero didn't come from friendly lands. It's a hostile state. Then he leans in, even as the hero is already walking away, and warns him they won't be able to protect him in a situation like this, his voice tight with real worry. Mars only answers one thing. He's ready for whatever comes next, and the moment those words leave his mouth, a warm, steady smile blooms across his face. Then the hero storms out of Clarissa's house, sword blade angled forward, and takes a ready stance as he heads straight for the accident scene. Then he bursts into a sprint like the wind itself, charging straight into the mess, while a completely empty street stretches out before him. Right then, he charges over to the Count and Boron as they're deep in conversation, and the moment he's close enough, he blurts out an apology, begging for forgiveness. Then the young man grins wide and bright, and boldly asks the aristocrats if he can team up with them and fight the goblins. The Baron snaps one look at the hero, then roars through the whole street that he's the damn thief. And from there, the Count just stares utterly baffled, like he can't believe what he's seeing. The Count fires one brutal question, "Did you steal the Sword of Dams?" And when Mars glances down at the blade sitting in his own hands, pure shock hits him like lightning. Then the Count snaps that he'll handle the theft later. Right now, he orders the hero to get out and stay out of it dead serious. No games. Suddenly, a soldier in full armor charges up behind the Count and snaps, "Don't jump to conclusions. This boy alone wiped out every last goblin." When the hero heard that the soldier knew exactly what he'd been up to lately, a smug grin snapped onto his face, and the Count staggered, utterly stunned by the news. Then the Count pulled the hero aside and begged him to lend his power to smash the goblins. Mars snaps back, saying he's already going to do exactly that, and he refuses to let a single chance to help the city slip by. Suddenly, a massive stone rockets forward and blasts the soldier behind the blonde armored man, and the guy crumples straight to the ground, knocked out cold. The Knight Commander spots it. Irritation sparks across his face, and he realizes just like that, he's lost yet another person. And just like that, he realizes this is it. The end. The man. He's the commander of the Blair Knights. All hope collapses and despair swallows him whole. A lone man drops to his knees before a screaming swarm of goblins, fighting the panic as he thinks, "If I back down now, the locals will pay." Fueled by that spark, the knight commander grits his teeth, claws his way up from his knees, and forces himself to stand, while his legs tremble like they might give out any second. Then the knight hoists his sword, jabs it toward the monsters, and steals his heart. He knows he might die here, but he'll hold the line and stop them. Right now, a massive goblin barrels toward the brave knight and swings in, ready to smear him across the ground. The monster had already thrown a swing at the knight, and now it just keeps staring at the goblin, totally baffled, like it can't even understand what's going on. As the truth hits, despair instantly breaks across the soldier's face right then. At the goblin's neck, something rockets forward at an insane speed. Right then, the monster clamps a claw around his throat, and his companions whip their heads toward him in stunned disbelief. Then a monstrous giant crashes down right onto their relatives, and shock hits them like a punch. The knight commander stares at the picture like it's blown his mind, while Mars chops down the last goblins. Then the commander leans in, stunned by how cleanly Mars handles his technique. After wiping out the goblins, the hero strides up to the knight's leader and declares, "They're done, so you can finally breathe easy." He stares at the hero in pure shock, then flings out a stunned "Thank you" to Mars and makes sure the surviving soldiers hear it too. Mars shrugs it off and orders them back because the Count is already waiting, right there. So the hero marches a squad of knights into motion, and they roar the words, "Long live the swordsman." The Count grins at the hero and declares the city is safe because of him, then casually shrugs off barren dams for later, because right now they've got one thing to talk about: his reward. The hero locks eyes with the Count, grins, and fully throws his support behind him. No doubts, no resistance, not even a hint of disagreement. The scene jumps to the Adventurers Guild, where a bald man with a thick, bushy mustache strides in, thanks Mars for the whole city, and then introduces himself as the local guildmaster. Then the guildmaster leans in and demands the hero's name. "What's it?" The kid grins and says, "Me, Mars." Right after that, Mars drops a bomb. He tells the man he's got a question, and the young man can't help wondering what kind. The boy finally blurts out, "Is there any way to stop this maze from saturating?" And the Count and the guildmaster just stare at the hero, completely stunned. The guildmaster shoots back that the only way to end the maze's saturation is to conquer it. And the boy, right after, fires off another question about when he's finally getting fed. He snaps back that their country is at war right now, so they've got no hands to spare, and that's why the labyrinth conquest has stalled completely. The hero tells them, "I get it." And his voice turns quiet thoughtful, but just a bit distant. Mars then declares, voice deadly serious, that this time he'll take the maze down himself. Hearing that, the Count and the guildmaster froze in total shock. Every bit of that panic was screaming off their faces. Then the guildmaster begins laying it out. 4 adventurers from the same rank vanished from there and never came back. The Count leans in, asking the hero if he's really going to march in alone. And the hero hears it plain. That place is insanely dangerous. Right in the middle of the conversation, Clarissa explodes into the room, screaming that this time the hero can take her with him, so everyone whips around, staring at the totally uninvited guest in shock. The hero freezes, stunned, and blurts out the girl's name. The guildmaster jolts in surprise and asks the girl, straight up, if she really wants to hit the maze with the hero. Then the man fires back, that even with his holy magic, it's still too deadly. The girl stares him down and declares that staying like this is even more dangerous, then decides she'll go with Mars because together they'll finally have a real shot at success. So the hero storms up to the guildmaster and demands Clarissa be allowed to go with him, but the guildmaster is having none of it, not even a little. Then the Count steps in, calling it an emergency, and promises to do everything he can to back them up. The Count leans in and asks what the hero wants, and the hero answers without hesitation. He demands a promise that the Rampad family's protection will be his. Mars tells himself that he and Charissa finally laid out every problem they had with that nobleman. The hero asked, and the Count promised straight up that the Rampad family would be safe. Then the hero thanked him for backing them up. Night creeps over the city as the guildmaster praises Mars and Clarissa as pure standouts, and the Count nods right along, agreeing without hesitation. Then the Count leans in and orders the guildmaster to have Mars registered as an adventurer. Victor nods and agrees without hesitation. The scene rockets to Clarissa's house right as the heroes step in. The girls' parents are there to greet them, and the heroes break the news they're heading into the maze. The parents give the green light, and right there on the spot, they forgive Mars and even trust him to watch over their daughter. The heroes finally hit the beds, but Mars is already restless. He's itching to get home, so he decides he has to tear through the maze fast, even though the moment he goes, he can't stop worrying about the city and Clarissa. Before his rebirth, the hero remembers a tense talk with a demigod. Then Mars snaps into action, deciding he has to power up Clarissa, because if she grows strong enough, she can storm the maze and set herself up for a huge future. The fight gets shoved to tomorrow now. The heroes hit the road, stocking up with weapons as they gear up for a brutal, long haul ahead. Suddenly, the hero whips around to Clarissa and demands that before he punishes the maze, she has to grow stronger. Then the girl nods and agrees. Then the hero clocks Clarissa's skills for himself, casting the Heavenly Eye spell and putting her power under his magic lens. So the heroes finally realized Clarissa had a gift for barrier magic. The girl stared at them, totally stunned. She could do it. Clarissa snapped to the hero and asked how she was supposed to use it, and Mars grimaced, telling her, in plain truth, that he just didn't know. The girl snapped a little inside, and Mars stepped in and said, "All right, let's start with what we can do right now." Then the hero leaned in and confessed he wasn't a real swordsman at all. He was a magician who mastered wind magic and holy magic too. And the girl was left absolutely starstruck. After she witnessed every single ability Mars had, her eyes lit up with pure starstruck admiration for the hero, like she couldn't stop staring. Then Mars finally turned to Clarissa and asked, "How does someone get stronger?" And she shot back that it all boils down to hard work. The hero leans in and says, "Hard work matters, but the real key is practice." Then, just like that, Mars drags the girl into the dungeon and orders her to take down her first target, one small, pretty weak goblin. Once she clocked what Mars was asking for, the girl froze, questions spiraled in her mind non-stop. "How am I supposed to do this?" she wondered. The sword felt insanely heavy, and doubt clawed at her. Could she really handle it? One moment. The question hit her hard. Could she actually beat this monster? And the fear flashed straight across her eyes. Suddenly, the goblin snapped into a full attack, and right then, the girl heard the hero's voice booming, yelling at her to stay awake, not to fall asleep. Just as that goblin was about to strike the girl, a brutal blast of air tore in at the last second, sending the monster flying away from Clarissa. Mars rushed up to the girl and demanded to know if she was okay. Clarissa just shook it off and said she was fine. Suddenly, the hero spotted the girl trembling from head to toe, so he turned to Clarissa and asked, "So, are you still sure if you change your mind? I'll go alone." The girl ducked her head in shyness, and when she began to speak, she confessed that the moment that nobleman tried to end her father, she felt completely powerless. Even if it's brutal, she vows to toughen up because she wants the strength to guard her family no matter what. She begs Mars for one more brawl with the goblin, and when the hero grins, he tells her he's rooting for that girl to get even stronger. Once again, the hero drags Clarissa into a training sparring match, this time against a puny goblin from the maze, while Mars barks at her to start getting comfortable with that sword's weight, and Clarissa obediently follows every single order without missing a beat. The girl hypes herself up in her own head, "I can do anything," and shoves fear of defeat aside, finally locking in her courage and charging straight at the goblin. With her sword raised high, the girl barrels straight at the maze monster because it won't just stand there either. It charges right back to smash into her. Then, at the perfect distance, she drops her sword angle and aims to slice the goblin straight on because Clarissa has already figured out the exact hit, the exact spot, and the exact moment to take him down. She pulls off her plan, plunging her blade into the goblin's chest, pouring every bit of power from her delicate hands into that single strike. The monster shrieks in agony, and she stares back with ice-cold, unshakable seriousness. With a sickening finality, the goblin's lifeless body lay crumpled at the girl's feet, finished, defeated. Right then, Mars burst up to Clarissa, shouting with pure joy that she'd done an incredible job, and his excitement knew no bounds. Suddenly, her legs buckled, and she dropped to her knees on the cold stone floor of the maze, sword clutched in both hands, eyes crushed with sorrow, as a confused, chaotic aura swirled around her. The hero couldn't figure out why the girl looked so crushed and wrecked, but when she met his eyes, she was smiling. She said it was like a mountain had been yanked right off her shoulders. Clarissa plunged into bigger and bigger fights against the monsters in the maze, and each battle forged her even stronger, so she trained every single day until she could grip her sword like it was an extension of her own will. Then the girl started hunting down upgrades for herself, training up piece by piece to finally go smash the maze. And as the days passed, Clarissa's power kept climbing higher and higher. Clarissa's crew bursts out of the clinic where she works, and on the ride home, they start trading rumors these days. People are pouring into Clarissa's clinic all the way from other cities. The girl leans in and admits it like a shock. There are suddenly so many new faces she doesn't even recognize anymore. Suddenly, a weird, heavy feeling slams into the hero and tightens his nerves like someone's been watching them all along. He whips around, adrenaline roaring, and starts tearing through the area, hunting for the source. Clarissa is totally thrown off by what Mars is doing, so she zeroes in on why the hero is acting like this. Mars insists everything's fine and tells her to ignore it, and the hero just brushes it off like she must have imagined the whole thing. Then Clarissa flashes this bright, happy grin and tells the hero, "Come on, let's hit a restaurant today. You need meat to bounce back after a rough day." The hero nods and agrees. A man crouched behind the house, spying on Mars and Clarissa, desperate not to get caught. Then as soon as he realized Mars had spotted something, he bolted deeper into hiding from where he's peeking. His face is stone serious, with a sharp, irritated edge. The next day rolls in bright skies, blazing sun, and the heroes head straight back into the maze so Clarissa can train again. This time with an even tougher opponent to sharpen her skills for real. Mar tells Clarissa it's her time now she's strong enough to take down the goblin general by herself, even though she looks unbelievably small against that towering monster. And at first glance, you'd bet she can't possibly win. The girl instantly remembers keep your distance from big monsters, so she shoots the gap wide between you and it as fast as she can, before it gets the chance to swing at her first. Once Clarissa hits the perfect distance, she snaps into action and readies her attack right as the goblin starts closing in. She loads her bow, targets him without hesitation, and strikes the spots she's already planned to break. Then she snaps her gaze to her opponent and fires an arrow to blind him with a single strike from her bow dead on, because her training had already taught her exactly how to use it. The arrow slammed dead center, skewering the monster's left eye, and it screamed in agony, shocked that such a fragile girl could do this before she drove home her advantage with another arrow to knock the goblin general off balance. Clarissa loosed an arrow that punched straight into the monster's leg, then another that slammed into its shoulder, and a final shot that pinned its hand, shaking the huge beast off balance. Then the girl lined up her final shot for the one spot the goblin general couldn't survive. She aimed for it with absolute certainty, and it turned out her weak point was his head. Clarissa loosed an arrow that hit dead center, and the goblin general crumpled straight into the peaceful realm of dreams. While Clarissa battled the goblin general, Mars kept his eyes glued on her, reading every single move like a puzzle because he was absolutely thrilled by her victory over the goblin. Then Clarissa realized she could still whitewash an opponent this strong all by herself. No rules, no limits, just pure, unstoppable joy, and a winning grin lighting up her face. Then the heroes rush off to celebrate Clarissa's win over the goblin general, and the moment they arrive, the girl can barely contain her joy. She's practically bursting with happiness. Mars tells Clarissa he always knew she'd pull through, and he gives her a huge, full heart salute for beating that goblin. The girl lights up and says that thanks to the hero, she's grown stronger, then turns to thank Mars for it, and the hero answers right back. Then he urges her to head home and get some rest. She nods and they hurry back together. There, they tear into some ridiculously tasty sandwiches. Clarissa gobbles them down with zero hesitation, and the hero can't help wondering if she's starving. The girl shoots back that she burned through all her energy, so yeah, she's starving. The hero nods like he totally gets it. Then he stares at Clarissa like she's casting a spell, mesmerized because in his mind, tomorrow they're stepping into the maze, and these fun days are about to vanish. Suddenly, the girl catches the hero staring at her and blurts out, "Why are you looking at me like that?" Heat crawls up her cheeks, and she can't help but feel embarrassed. Mars says he was just mulling it over for a second. Then he swings the talk right back to how insanely good the sandwiches taste. The day they finally hit the maze is almost here, so the heroes grab the Count's hands, thanking him for riding out to escort them right to the entrance. Suddenly, that creepy feeling of being watched crashes back over the hero, and Mars jerks his head up on the spot, scanning the area like he can't afford to miss a thing. Then he spins toward the Count and asks, "Do you feel like we're being tailed?" The hero nods and blurts out that the last time that same gut-telling fear showed up was ages ago, but today it's hitting him harder than ever. The Count tells him, "Relax, I've already handled that," and orders Mars to stop getting distracted and start conquering the maze. The hero nods along with the Count, but a chill tells him something bigger is brewing, so he locks in on conquering the maze right now. Then the Count, the heroes, and a whole squad of knights step into the maze together. A brutal fight erupts humans versus the monsters lurking in the maze, and the Count barks the command to his men, "Attack without holding back." Then he whirls to Mars and declares, "Me and my people stay, everything else is up to the heroes." And with that he's gone. Mars nods, and him and Clarissa hit the road. The deeper they push into the maze, the nastier the monsters get, but these heroes don't flinch. Every obstacle gets crushed as they surge forward. When they finally reach the boss's room, most of the monsters are already sprawled out like lifeless corpses. Then Mars steps up and orders the boss to hand it over to him, and Clarissa immediately backs him. Then they step into the boss's room. He's lounging on the throne, completely unbothered, already convinced some random boy can't possibly threaten him. Then the hero finally turns on the Goblin King. Mars's target is the boss himself, and the goblin monster snaps into action, even getting back up from the throne to accept Mars's challenge. Clarissa watches, worry tight in her chest, as Mars steps in to take the fight from the Goblin King, because this boss is way stronger than any goblin they've faced, and just then the Goblin King starts closing in. But Mars whips up a full-on tornado and hurls it straight at the Goblin King. Boom! He's wiped from the fight on the spot, and Mars walks away the winner. Clarissa freezes in pure shock at how effortlessly the hero smashes the Goblin King, and the hero calmly tells her, "We've conquered the maze, now we're heading back to the city." The scene snaps to Barnum Damse's world. He sinks into his massive, luxurious throne, smirks as his plan clicks into place, and thinks Count Beetle is as good as finished. The Baron brags that with his own money, he's hired 200 mercenaries, then they'll wipe out Count Beetle's knights in no time. And that's exactly why Baron Dames is plotting a coup. Lazily perched in his chair, the Baron bursts into loud laughter and declares he'll rule this city. Then a sudden knock hits the door, and his mind races. Did they already come with word about Count Beetle? He throws the door open, yells whether the knights got wiped out, and the second he hears it, color drains from his face right as the Baron himself goes completely speechless. Right in front of him stands Count Beetle himself, the same guy who perfectly picked up every word of the Baron's speech, and now you can practically see the fury boiling on his face. He stands there, dripping contempt at the Baron, and right behind him looms his pack of knights. Dame's orders clear as day, they're there to kill. The story slams back into the maze. Mars and Clarissa burst out, only to face a guard that Count Beetle left waiting for them. He thanks the heroes for their hard work, then leans in and asks how the maze is going, only for Mars to snap back that they've already finished. And the soldier is so stunned he can only blurt out that the heroes are absolutely incredible. Then he declares that Count Beetle is already back at home, so he'll lead the heroes himself, and Mars nods right along like, "Yeah, that's it." Then the story slams into Count Beetle's estate, where the Count personally greets Mars and Clarissa only to watch them stare in shock at a truly bizarre scene. Baron ladies bound up, and Clarissa's own parents acting out in ways that don't add up. Count Beetle finally breaks the silence, grinning and saying he's just relieved the heroes came back from the maze alive. Then he reveals this: while the heroes were busy conquering the maze, Baron Dames was secretly plotting a coup right in the city. The Count snaps that Dames has been stockpiling weapons and paying mercenaries for ages, so they decide it's time to keep a close eye on him. Count Beetle strips Baron Dames of his title and throws him behind bars for trying to pull off a coup. The moment he hears it, the former Baron goes white with terror, toga and all. They drag him away while the Count strolls back to his guests. He gratefully bows to Mars and Clarissa for smashing through the maze, then declares right to the kids that they're the heroes of their country. Clarissa's parents stand right there, grinning, like it's a miracle, so happy they can barely breathe, while the Count declares, because of the kids' merit, The Rampart family will finally earn its title. Then the Count whips his attention to Clarisse's father and demands an answer when he's ready, and the man just nods because he has to talk it over with his family first. Then the whole family storms out of the Count's office and heads straight home, except Mars, who gets snagged for a little while when his Count tells him to stay for the day, and the hero agrees on the spot without even blinking. At nightfall, he's sitting down at the same table as Count Beetle, and they're both tucking into a heavy, hearty feast. Then the Count shoots an apology for what the former Baron's ladies did, while his subordinate still at that table swears an apology to Mars for spying, and Mars just waves it off, saying it's all fine. Then everyone sinks into a quiet dinner until the Count suddenly snaps up and says it's time to get down to business. He turns to Mars and blurts that he's from the Marcus Kingdom, an enemy that never plays nice, and the moment Mars realizes he's been discovered, fear hits the hero like a sudden punch. The Count tells him to chill, insisting Mars isn't hostile toward them. Then it explodes into the truth. Count Beetle tried to register the hero as an adventurer, and the whole lie gets exposed. With that cleared up, the hero finally blurts out exactly what's happening to him right now. After hearing the hero's tale, the Count weighed it all and decided it didn't look like teleportation was the way back then. He straight up vowed he'd make sure Mars gets brought home. Mars bows and thanks the Count for his kindness, and the Count calmly tells him, "Expect about a week for the preparations. I'll send a letter, so Marcus's kingdom knows it's safe." So, yep, Mars gets shoved right back to Earth, and with one last goodbye to Count Beetle and Clarisse's family, the moment hits hard. They all flood him with gratitude for every good deed, and the hero turns around and thanks them right back. Then he leans toward Clarissa and tells her to take care of herself. She only smiles, like she already knows everything will be okay. A girl stands on the street, tapping her left foot like she can't wait, then whips around to the couple behind her and starts firing off excited words to them. The heroine tells her mom and dad how deeply grateful she is for everything they've done, and right then, her parents start trembling, fighting back tears they can't quite hold in. With tears pooling in her eyes, the girl still insists she'll go with her dear friend, so she has to leave the home she loves. And somehow, a bright smile cuts through the sadness. Clarisse's words hit the guy like a shockwave, and his eyes go wide as his manhole gapes open because he never saw her agreeing to follow him down the road coming. The girl bursts into her parents' embrace, tears pouring down their faces, swearing, "I'll be fine, I'll be home soon." Then he strides up with total confidence toward the main character. This young guy watches everything from the side, eyes bulging with shock, tears already brimming because the moment hits him hard. Then he nods, confirming they can go. Mars, already geared up and itching to ride, tells them they're good to go. Then the moment they pull out, the crowd erupts, screaming for them to come back to them at least sometimes. Clarisse's trip went perfectly sights everywhere, non-stop delicious food, until the couple finally hit that brand new city. As soon as they stumbled into the village tavern, the girl plopped down and told him she'd had the time of her life traveling. And the guy grinned back that it's even better when she's right there with him. Right here, Mars gets hit by a full-on loud scream. Then he spots a breathless, mustachioed man who barrels into the tavern and demands his attention. An urgent quest is coming. Furious, the stranger keeps ranting that he desperately needs to track down an escaped slave, screaming that she bolted into the monster forest and that they can't find her anywhere in there. Visitors start to wonder if that lost slave was different somehow, and that thought lights a fuse in a man's head, making him bite his lip like he can't wait. The man, dressed too well for this humble place, lifts his head, squeezes his fists, and boldly declares that the missing girl is an elf. A young man and a girl traveling together suddenly hear some stranger is offering a whopping 100 gold pieces and begging for someone to take the job. With a grin on his face, he turns to his companion and says it's time to pack up and go. Then, at the next table, he catches a man mutter that a reward that big is downright irresistible. The innkeeper keeps pushing back, insisting that if they take this job, they'll be sent straight into the monster forest, and that place is terrifying even for B-rank adventurers. A man with a ponytail rises up and declares, "Sure, money matters, but life matters way more." A fur-coated man with a black collar seethes because nobody backed his mission, so the inn's visitors snap at him to drop the hunt for the missing slave, and meanwhile the heroes are already heading out. Clarisse turns to her companion and asks if he's ever laid eyes on elves. He shakes his head and she smirks and says she hasn't met a single one either. The girl peers out through a window set into the carriage wall, and the guy clocks it instantly. They're now riding right alongside the forest where the elf was lost. To prove he's right, the main character yanks open the map, and there it is, a monster-filled forest sitting right next to them, scaring the locals to death. Suddenly, Mars's companion yelps, demanding he stare straight ahead and look closely. Right as the carriage barrels through the thicket, a girl with two tails pops up right in front of it, like she's sprinting for her life from something terrifying. And the couple can't believe what they're seeing. As the carriage barrels closer, the heroes spot it, clear eyes and ears peeking out from the hair, and that's how they know an elf girl is sitting right there. That elf is sprinting for their life from a black snake one neither the main character nor Clarice has ever laid eyes on, because this thing is absolutely massive. The young driver spots her sprinting toward them, panic screaming through him as he fears the carriage will slam into her. Then in the very next second, he yanks his sword free. Mars grabs his favorite weapon and tells his companion, "I'm going after that snake," while Clarice snaps, "Keep that scared girl safe." His girlfriend just listens, wide-eyed, right there with them. He flips off his seat outside the carriage and sprints straight for the girl in trouble because that snake is creeping in on her, inch by inch, ready to pounce. He rockets up and smashes the snake only to crank the cold-blooded fury higher. She snaps her muzzle toward the young man, and that massive mouth swings up in front of the heroes. The young man springs to the ground, then ricochets off the spot and barrels deeper into the forest to snatch the snake before it reaches the girl, who's fleeing for her life. Meanwhile, she rushes straight for the carriage. The main character barely slips past his opponent's razor-sharp punches, throwing his edged weapon up to shield himself. Then Mars panics and bolts away, staring at what just happened, like his brain can't process it, while the snake slithers after him with wild, crazed eyes. The snake blasts venom forward, and the young man snaps out of the way, just in time then. When he whips his head back, he sees the spit has already burned straight through the wood. The main character can't figure out why his windblade won't touch this monster as a snake coils into tight rings, staring him down like it's studying him. Then the guy curses, furious. Mars flicks on the eye of heaven and, boom, he can see every detail of the infernal snake, and it's way stronger than the Goblin King's, so he knows he'll have to pull out skills that hit even harder. In the very next heartbeat, an arrow slams into the huge black snake, stunning both the beast and the hero battling it. And as he whips his head around, he spots Clarice racing in to help. The girl keeps firing arrows without stopping, and her friend yells that the snake is spewing poison from its mouth, so don't get careless. Then he asks for a few seconds to stall it, and she instantly agrees. A snake lunges at Clarice, and she scrambles to break free. Meanwhile, the main character plants his sword in the ground, staring it down, begging her to hang on just a little longer. Mars digs deep, unleashes his inner magic, and snaps a tiny stream of flame into one hand and a small tornado into the other, whipping the snake's attention away. A cold-blooded beast twists its motion mid-stride and lunges back at him again, and he blurts that he just needs a little more time, a little more, so his power can hit its full strength. But before he can finish, the snake is right beside him and snaps its mouth wide open. A venomous snake lunges at the barrier, trying to pierce it with its fangs. Then out of nowhere, a shield snaps into place above the young man as he casts his spell. The snake finally breaks through, but the main character is already in full attack mode. The hero thrusts both hands forward and flings a spell that roars like a firestorm, pure crackling energy of fire and air, blasting straight into that wild monster and slamming it dead on. As the spell that saved the traveler and smashed that monster's threat fades away, Mars whips around to find his fighting girlfriend right behind him, and she's stunned to see exactly what just happened. A little later, it clicks. Turns out the barrier choking the main character was built with help from the barrier wizard Clarice, and the guy straight up swears that because of him, his life got saved. With a timid little hand, she shields her already flaming pink cheeks and admits it was a risky gamble, but she's bursting with joy that she actually pulled it off. When the battle's adrenaline finally dies down, the young man shoots a question, "Where did you put the elf?" The girl grins and says, "I stashed it in the carriage," and he nods like it all makes perfect sense. Then the two of them head straight for the carriage. The moment the carriage door swings open, the heroes snap into view of the girl they just kept safe from a monstrous snake beast, and Clarice blurts, "Is the elf hurt?" The girl curled into a trembling ball by the transport's wall, clutching her knees to her chest as panic chewed at her begging. over and over if her rescuers would come back and send her to the merchant. The elf wraps her bruised hands over her face and breaks down with tears in her eyes, begging them not to take her back. Then her voice spirals into raw hysteria as the travelers watch and snap that they're not turning around. The blonde traveler strides up to the girl they saved, and she jolts with fear. Then she demands to know if it's all real, and Clarice confirms, straight up, that they're telling the truth. Joy blazing in her chest, the elf sprints into her new friend's arms, the same friend who helped save her, while the young man leans over the carriage, stunned by the sight that's got his companion staring in total disbelief. Clarice grins and asks what that earlier girl's name is, the one they just saved, and even as she clings to the girl's chest, she blurts out, "It's Misha!" The traveler begs for Misha's story, and she starts explaining how that same guy the group spotted at the bar promised to take her to her mom, then flipped the script and snatched her instead. The elf stays cradled in her new acquaintance's arms and blurts that she needs to get back to her mother now. Then the young man drops to one knee in front of the teary girls and declares, "It's all settled. We've already decided." He snaps her attention, then promises they'll find her mother together, and right then, gratitude hits her like lightning. She raises her tear-soaked face and blurts that they truly saved her, thanking them all over again. A couple of the main crew stepped up, helped Misha introduce herself, and blurted out their names because once that new goal locked in, their mission became clear: track down Misha's mother. The carriage grinds to a halt in the heart of the forest, and the heroes spill out. Then that guy stares at the elf they just saved and snaps that she needs a wash first, because dirt and bruises cling to her like war scars. The young man slams earth magic into the ground, and a little pool springs up out of the soil. Then he blasts it with water magic to fill it, and finally he whips out fire magic to crank the water hot. The main character stares at what his hard work produced and grins, then turns to the girls and declares, "The bath is ready." They can't hide their excitement as they start stripping down. Clarice and the girl they saved earlier are sprawled out, totally relaxed, soaking in the warm water and enjoying every second. The young heroine's jaw drops when she realizes she and her rescuers are the same age. Then the traveler confirms it, explaining that's why they can talk to each other freely instead of hiding behind honorifics. He sat in silence for a while until the adventurer leaned in and fired a question at Misha: what kind of person her mom really was. Misha answered, without hesitation, her mother was a B-rank adventurer, and on top of that, she was insanely strong and drop-dead gorgeous. After a quick pause, the elf blurts out that, yeah, she didn't have to say it, then casually adds that her savior has the same huge chest as her mother, and right there by the building, keeping watch and guarding the perimeter. The main character hears every word. Misha slips into the outfit Clarice hands her, flashes a grin, and says the clothes are super cute even if they run a bit bigger than what she's used to. She shrugs it off like, it's all good. The girl dashes up to the main characters and thanks them politely. Then they pile into the carriage and roll out fast because night is creeping in. Once the travelers finally stumble into the nearest city, their stomachs drop. This is the exact destination Count Beetle begged them to avoid. They spin in place, scanning the streets, and it hits them hard. There's nothing here for kids to do. The main character trudged through the streets, instantly spotting suspicious faces everywhere. Then the memory hit they'd come through a monster-filled forest, and now danger was waiting for them right around the city corner. Right out of nowhere, that one-eyed stranger whips around to the guy on the right and grips him with a sword, then asks the young man if he's a knight's apprentice, offering to sell him a masterpiece blade for 10 gold pieces. The guy says he's got 0 money, so he refuses, but the old man begs him not to waste a chance. Then Mars bolts, and as he hurls it over his shoulder, he's thinking, there's no way you can slip out of luck like this. The main character reaches an establishment where people pick up tasks, slides up to the makeshift reception desk, and asks for a quest and where he can crash for the night in this city. The guy doesn't even hesitate and shuts him down. No quests at all. The young man gets told the hotel is across the street, and he immediately thanks the woman, while 2 men in the background watch in shock, stunned that their hero is so tiny for an adventurer. As he strides through the streets, he suddenly feels eyes on him. Then a voice slices through the tension, calling him small, luring his attention just long enough to turn around. And there it is, the crook who tried to buy him a sword, standing beside 2 strangers. The old man snaps that the young guy still blew his chance to grab a weapon, and the guy shoots back that even after being talked into it, he still won't buy it and begs for forgiveness. Then the stranger erupts, screaming that nobody's actually listening to him properly. That sixth sense tingles, and the guy snaps his head around someone's creeping up behind him. He rockets into a high jump before the enemy can grab him, and the attack misses as he lands. Next second, the guy plants his feet right into the eye-patched man's face, shoves him off, then launches soaring over two massive guys who scramble to grab him and lands behind them like it was all planned. One bald guy spots how smoothly the stranger moves, and the second smirks that he'd fetch a huge profit at auction, so the others lock in, dreaming of a massive jackpot. And the young man snaps into a fighting stance. Gripping his sharp blade with white-knuckle fear, the main character realizes he has to race back to his girlfriend right now. One of the hairless strangers snaps a sword to his own throat and starts swinging, insisting the young man won't fight, then promises the two girls they found nearby won't feel alone. Mars snaps into it. "Oh, you mean Clarice and Misha," and with a sudden drop, he hurls his sword into the dirt and lets them take him. He promises he'll be obedient, then shoots back. "All right. Can I at least get to meet the girls?" One robber grabs a bag and swings it toward the young man's head, right as he starts gloating, calling it an awesome move. The very next second, a cotton-filled bag drops and smothers his head and shoulders. The two bald goons who snagged Mars with pure threats rush back to hide, their ringleader bragging that they hauled in prime merchandise while the wild-eyed one growls that they nailed it, and that tonight's auction is going to be absolutely massive. The boss slams his order from behind his office desk, "Bring the caught prey to my room," and two massive guards snap to attention and carry it out as they march him down the corridors to the room they've picked for him. The main character swings the door open, then a force shoves him into the room, and the door slams shut behind him. Right outside, a command snaps through the air, "Don't even lay a single finger on his familiar girls." The elf girl and his young combat buddy light up the moment they see him. They practically spring from their seats, shout his name, and he fires back, asking if either of them got hurt. The girls dropped back onto the bed and said, "We're fine," because where they ended up, the people treated them pretty well, and Mars even adds, "There's something good about this place." Clarice blurts out an apology to her comrade for getting caught so stupidly. Then the young man waves it off, saying it's no big deal. But the next second, the elf snatches the blonde heroine and blurts that she's terrified. He slides down beside the girls, tells them to breathe and trust him, everything's going to be fine. And then the young man admits he purposely let the robbers catch him so he could save them. Mars snaps that he won't let anyone disrespect them. Then the elf's tears dry instantly, and hope ignites in her eyes. Right when they step outside, they're sure they'll spot Misha's mother. So he tells her to hold her horses for a little while. Joy flares in Misha's eyes, a rosy blush surges across her cheeks, and she beams so hard at what the young man says that she instantly nods and agrees. A few minutes later, two bald men burst into the room, bragging about how they've been snatching heroes, and they shove the message time to move. The three travelers get marched into the corridor, then ordered to go on ahead. A trio of young kids storms into the room, flanked by robbers, only to find slaves lined up right in front of them, all geared up for the auction happening today. While the girls chat among themselves, the main character scans the area, then spots something that instantly lights up his whole face with pure, heartfelt joy. With a razor-sharp stare, the guy spots the weapon tucked behind one of the kidnappers, the same one they yanked away during the capture, and he instantly realizes all he has to do is wait for the perfect moment to grab him. The auction kicks off, then the man they were delivered to after the heroes got snatched on the street walks in. And the first thing he does is thank every guest for their hype before announcing the HID Trading Company event is starting. And he promises this auction is going to be the best one yet. The masked stranger steps up and demands the wealthy crowd who came for thrills to stay put till the final moment, then grins and declares that the first product is about to hit the stage. An overweight man is dragged onto the stage, tears blasting from his eyes, and the crowd instantly recognizes him. He's the ex-baron of the kingdom. The seller steps up and slams down the starting bid one single gold coin. The bidder bursts into laughter, then grins and tells everyone he's counting on the crowd of visitors to cheer his event. Using his own words, the merchant sends the hall into this extra wave of satisfaction. Then fresh arrivals snap, "Is this all a joke?" They spit, "We don't want this garbage," and shove for the next product. The ex-aristocrat is hauled backstage, and the masked man shoots him an apology for the miscalculation, then promises right there to blast the best moment of his act as payback. 3 heroes burst onto the scene, a young man who only surrendered because his girlfriend's life was held hostage, and 2 girls who just happened to catch a robber's eye. They whisper about this guy, perfect in every way, and they slap his price tag at 50 gold. Then the blonde girl steps in with spotless skin and hair that gleams like starlight. Her price jumps to 100 gold, and when she turns to the elf, the rumors hit harder. 150 gold. The masked man snaps, "All right, bids start now," and throws the room's men and women into a frenzy, watching the rich folks kick off their outrageous offers. That elf girl catches the low buzz of voices and instantly knows that she's about to be taken again, forced again, maybe even sold into slavery. And her eyes flood with tears as fear rattles her whole body. Misha slips behind Clarice with a tiny, barely there squeak, and the whole scene gets laughs first from the seller, who claims the girl's just spooked by how those screensavers are built, and then from one of the men who casually admits he likes her. An old man shoots his hand up, smirks like he knows a secret, and promises he'll hand over a jaw, dropping 10,000 gold coins for all 3 of them. Everyone in the crowd gasps, because that kind of money is so massive, nobody can outbid him. Crowds surge toward a man ready to burn a fortune just to hang out with the strangest freaks until a blood-curdling voice explodes from the crowd, screaming, "Stop the bidding!" The guests watch the doors swing open, and in strides the mystery man who ordered at the tavern because he's come hunting for the girl who vanished in the monster's forest. Flanked by his guards, he points to the elf and declares, loud and certain, "She's mine." A man draped in an expensive fur coat clenches his jaw, veins bulging on his forehead, as rage surges through him, and with eyes squeezed shut in fury, he screams that Mr. Hyde has stolen what's rightfully his. The mustachioed hero barks orders and screams that they have a right to take what's his. Then the auction boss snaps his fingers, throwing his robbers at him while shouting for them to stop him. 2 wildly different gangs line up face to face, their eyes screaming cunning and raw aggression, fists clenched and weapons already primed as their leaders bellow each other's names. Then the clash erupts. With a young man and 2 girls riding beside him, they watch the battle unfold, his eyes blazing as he suddenly realizes this total wreck is the perfect window to slip away. 2 rival crews clash and hurl themselves into each other's space, pairing off and going at it with blades, axes, anything they can swing while swords spark and bodies shove so far. Nobody's gaining the upper hand because the enemy forces are nearly dead, even. Eyes wide open, just stands there, locking onto every move in the hall, watching rich auction goers settle into their seats at those tables, like the whole room is playing out right in front of them. Young folks stare at the whole chaos while they're still forced up on that stage with their hands bound, convinced this massive battle erupted out of nowhere, until they see it. A mustachioed man and a masked one snap into a verbal war the moment they start swinging words back and forth. The people who'd already bid at the auction slam down their offers for the 3 young kids, then ask what's happening, and panic hits as they bolt to dodge the beatdowns. Meanwhile, the main character realizes nobody's paying attention to them anymore. The young man slips his magic under the ropes at his wrists, frees his hands, and realizes he can run now. But right then, a robber barges in and orders, "We're taking that young man and the girls." Seconds later, the man snaps around and his jaw drops because the main character has already busted free from the shackles. Stunned from the fall, the man hesitates just long enough for the hero to launch in, slam him down, and knock him out cold, sending the weapon skidding away from his hands. The hero crouches to grab the ball, but then the weapon suddenly doubles in his vision. Mars snaps his eyes shut and grits his way through a brutal wave of pain, and that freaks Clarice out so badly she blurts, "What's happening? Are you okay?" The young man forces a smile, eases himself up, insists everything's fine, and tells the girls to follow, so they do. But the auction owner spots it immediately and screams that they're trying to escape. The masked man is still posted on the stage behind the podium, staring down the chaos and demanding someone come help, yet every single one of his warriors is already stuck in the fight. One of the ball guys who hauled Mars and his friends to these auctions throws hands with a man in a headdress, then grins and admits he hasn't had a battle this fun in ages, and right then his opponent realizes the shock is he's already tapped out. The hairless stranger swings his sword one final time and with a cruel laugh says his goodbye. Then the second bald man announces he's done and erases the opponent with a single devastating blow. The bidders who backed the stranger, the real master of the sale, bragged that the whole fight was way too simple. His rivals were huge, but soft, and they couldn't resist the magic that lulls you straight to sleep. A mustached man in an expensive coat spots every one of his warriors knocked out cold, and that shock hits him hard. Then rage floods his face as he snaps that they're completely useless. A hooded stranger in the rain corners a bully and demands a favor. Promise me my rivals won't ever be able to fight again, and I'll be okay, right? The bully nods and hands him a massive bag of money. Once the warrior yanks off his hood, every scar across his face flashes into view, and he growls that he won't lay a hand on anyone who flees. But if you're still standing there, you'd better start praying. Everyone who stayed after the battle swears the giant is unstoppable, because the second the old man with the bandage on his face lays eyes on him, terror hits. An elderly man, stunned to the core at what he's seeing, erupts and barks an order, while his troops have to snap into place. Bald fighters thunder forward, slam into battle stances, and ready their cold steel. A towering brute clocks the enemy's plan. In an instant, he spots the two vanguard fighters pinning their advance, sees the magician charging up a spell, and watches the last man stand guard, shielding the wizard while he's totally defenseless. The bully clocks two bald guys closing in on him. So alike they might as well be brothers, and their synchronized steps move like they're perfectly in sync. The scar-faced guy clutches the money bag, the customer shoved into his hands, smirking that this trick would totally work if he were some kind of monster. Then he hurls another bag straight at the magician, mid-spell. In the next heartbeat, a massive man barrels in on two hairless rivals who are still scrambling to strike, and he barks, "Where the hell are you looking?" One of the bald men shouts at his partner to cover him as he launches the attack, and his teammate nods, then rockets forward toward the enemy, whose eyes go totally wild as the capillaries inside them explode. The bandit who snatched the distraction can't handle his opponent's massive sword. He shoves him again and again, until the blade's target slams into his own partner, and both of them tumble off the battlefield together. An old man with a bandage on his face jerks back in shock, realizing a huge brute wiped out the entire group in a blink and never once got touched by the tip of his sword. Then his hands start to tremble as he can't figure out how they're supposed to win. The giant comes charging straight at the gray-haired man, and panic slams into him, so he recoils hard, spins to flee the battlefield, and lets out a screaming, tearful plea. A massive brute slams his opponent into the dirt with a single thunderous blow, while the main character watches from close up, still juggling his fight against other robbers, his client, and even the enemy commander. A small crater still scars the hall where the tables used to stand after that brutal ball strike, and the giant stares, realizing Guido's quest is finished. Warriors flee from him, screaming that he's a monster. At the edge of the stage, a swordsman swings his focus around and spots a young fighter standing there with a blade of his own. His eyes narrow in disbelief, like only this guy is left, like this is the rival he's been waiting for. Interest sparks hard in his gaze. With one insane leap, that huge brute rockets off the battlefield and crashes onto the stage right in front of the young man still locked in a fighting stance. Then he can't help but wonder if the same fate that gutted his opponents earlier is about to slam into him next. The giant tells him straight up, "If you get out of my way, I won't lay a hand on you." The guy tries to explain it was all a misunderstanding, but the giant cuts him off, saying those weren't words he asked for, and he's not the type to mess with kids. With rage swelling second by second, the long-haired black warrior demands the young man get out. Then the moment the words land, the kid's gaze shifts, and his pupils start to change. The main character spots a bizarre image right before his eyes, like a ghostly, transparent hand is waving inches from his face, and even though it makes no sense, he convinces himself it's just a simple illusion. Then, out of nowhere, the scarred man snaps his arm forward and slams the young guy across the face. He's still got the sword in his grip, but it's not aimed anymore. The hero and his opponent both froze, stunned by how expertly, how fast, and how cleanly the young man slipped out of a strike that would have dropped any normal person. Then, just a heartbeat later, he spotted the illusion again. After a few more seconds, Mars finally noticed the man moving, even though he hadn't moved at all. and it hit him like a punch. He was looking straight into the future. That massive, long-haired brute who'd wiped out every bandit by himself comes swinging at the young man, but with his brand-new gift, he slips out of the line of fire like it was nothing. Shock flares across the warrior's eyes as he plants his fists against his own chest, stunned that the young man has dodged his strike twice already, then realizes this isn't some random fluke. Locked in a fighting stance, gripping a massive black sword that carved through more than one opponent, the rival of our main character snaps, asking who he really is. After hearing every word, the guy tells Mars, "Stay calm and let them go, and then I'll spill my secret." But the giant shuts him down so that whole exchange grates on Mars. The young man snaps the heavenly eye onto his opponent and instantly reads his traits, and he can't believe it, because they're the greatest he's ever seen. Then the bully bares his teeth and growls that he won't let the young man off the hook that easily. The man wraps the sword in cloth, worried sick about his young rival's safety, promising himself he'll only scare him. Then he bursts in with relentless strikes, and the young man realizes his opponent is insanely fast. Each thunderous swing of that massive sword misses the main character. He dodges every hit so the attacker is thrown off, and the main character can't help but snap. Irritated and curt, the man keeps battering forward, swinging that massive razor-edged weapon over and over, spitting that this time Mars won't dodge a single ferocious strike. The young man finally snaps into action. He lunges in with the very sword he'd been using in the monster forest to try and beat that snake, striking hard because he's been waiting for the perfect split second when his opponent dips just a little. The young man botches the move, and the giant snaps back with a sword swing, but he refuses to drop his weapon, gripping it tight as he realizes Kurt's blade weighs a ton. The scarred, big black-haired brute keeps hammering the attack, but the main character just won't break. He swallows the hits, even slams some back, and the attacker's jaw drops at how unreal his talent is. The man snaps his attacks to a halt and steps right in front of the young guy, still baffled. Why would someone this talented back a slave trader? Kurt throws it out loud. The main character is sitting on a massive gift, and it's being wasted. The young man gasps for breath after that brutal fight, utterly lost, wondering if running away from this guy might be his only option, until the man corners his opponent and demands, "Why won't you use your power for the people?" Panic spikes in his head. He can't even figure out how he'll save Loris and Misha, so he snaps and screams at the scarred man that he's a cheater and that he kidnapped that poor elf girl. Suddenly, the opponents spot movement on the stage, and the auctioneer starts closing in, step by step, toward the two girls traveling with the young man, arms out as if he's about to claim them. The young man and Kurt hit their moves at the exact same time, slashing through the chaos. To stop the girls from getting dragged off stage, he fires a water blade spell, and the dark-haired warrior crashes in beside him, swinging that massive sword like a shield and a warning. When they combo magic with weapons at the exact same time, it's so brutal it rips the whole scene clean in half, and both of them just stand there grinning like, "Yep, we nailed it." Suddenly, the mercenary snaps his gaze to the young man and admits he misjudged him, then tells him he's not the enemy at all, before launching into who his real client is. Kurt snaps that the one who truly hired him is Misha's mother, Sasha, and right then, a towering elf, weapon in hand and confidence in every step, strides toward the very house where that auction went down. Right after the heroes realize they're not enemies at all, a huge man yanks off his ball cloth, steps in and demands the young man's name, then presses him to reveal what technique he used because it definitely doesn't look like fencing. From a distance, a man who bankrolls Kurt to handle his enemies is watching it all, stunned, because he can't figure out why the rivals suddenly teamed up. The slaver who stormed in for his loot, trying to play it cool, asks his warrior to fetch him an elven child, and while he's yapping, he totally misses the arrow lining up on his head. In the very next second, arrows slam into him, then split his chest into right and left halves until unbearable, blinding agony takes over. A rich-looking man in a fancy coat crumples to his knees like something yanked him down. Then he lunges forward and smashes his forehead to the floor, right as the same arrows from before streak in and bury themselves at his feet. And that torment wrecks the slaver who shoved that tiny elf into kidnapping her. She'll feel every second of it. She sobs and screams with tears streaming, and that scream snaps the auction organizer's head around in shock. The moment the trading house boss whips his head around, distracted by the chaos in front of him, he spots a bow locked on his body. Then right as he processes it, magic arrows slam into his shoulders. The main character and his former enemy lock eyes on the source of the arrows, and then right out of nowhere, one arrow comes screaming straight toward the young man. Mars hesitated for a split second, but there wasn't time to dodge as the weapon tore down its path until Kurt slammed in front of him, spun him around, and told him the customer was already here. The man locks eyes with the elf, who's staring hard at the building where trading and magical creatures are going down, and then he yells at her, telling her the one she just shot isn't her enemy. Kurt snaps around and strides off, then orders Mars to head for Lister National School right now, and the kid's face instantly lights up with pure shock. The man rockets up to the second floor in 2 bounds, vanishes into the doorway, and before he's gone, he yells that the toughest people on Earth will come to the school he's been pushing, telling the guy, "Use my name as the recommendation." Panic flares in his eyes as he spins around and demands the young man confirm everything was right. Right then, Sasha blurts, "Thanks," to Kurt and throws herself down at the last second. The woman strides toward the main character with a steady, confident step, fury blazing in her eyes. Then 2 girls step out from behind the young man who just came down off the stage. The elf blurts, "Mother," and the rage in her face snaps into pure joy as she's finally reunited with her daughter. Tears spill down Sasha's face. She rips the mask off her nose and screams her daughter's name, and her child dashes into her arms with pure joy blazing on his face. A woman and a girl sprint toward each other, and in the blink of an eye, they crash into a joyful hug. Both stunned they've finally found each other again. Misha can't hold back as tears glint in her mother's eyes, and she admits she's heartbroken. Sasha nods, saying it's true, but now that she's finally reunited with her daughter, everything is okay again. The woman keeps squeezing Misha in her arms, shaking too, and swears it's all her fault that this happened. Misha's mom spins her around and promises that from now on everything will be okay, because she'll never let her go again. A couple of the main characters are watching all of this unfold, grinning, because the long-awaited family reunion finally happened, and they were terrified something would go wrong for their new friend. Suddenly, the young man starts swaying. His eyes roll back, and his head lurches toward the sky. He burns through every last bit of energy to resist, then crashes straight into Clarissa's arms. The girl tells the young man he did an amazing job, and that it all went perfectly then, still cuddled up in her arms. He agrees wholeheartedly and can't help thinking about his girlfriend. Misha is curled up in her mom's arms, pointing at a couple of heroes and yelling that they saved her. Then, once the noise settles, everyone starts trading stories about what really went down. Once everything finally got settled, Mars and his loyal buddy swept in and invited them to the hotel room. Sasha is in, right now. She asks the kids if they're hungry, then brings out a tray and drops a giant dome over the dish, like it's about to reveal something big. Under the dome sits a massive pile of fried chicken, ringed with every kind of veggie and mushroom you can imagine. And the girl's mother, just yesterday she bolted from a monster in the forest, turns to her daughter's rescuers and begs them to eat their fill. Everyone dives into the meal, laughing like they finally made it through the worst so you can eat, breathe, and truly relax now. Sasha included, because even while everyone's rejoicing, she's glued to her daughter, staring in that quiet way that says, "I missed you," after only a short separation. While they were digging into their meal, Sasha leaned in and warned them that Gnaw, this city they'd ended up in, had recently turned into a full-blown crime hotspot. When the young man hears those words, it finally clicks. This is exactly why Count Beetle warned them to stay away. The elf across from him even says it plain the city is way too dangerous for children. She thrusts a rock-heavy bag packed to the brim with cash and tells the travelers, "This is my heartfelt thanks for everything you've done for me and for my whole family." Sasha snaps that, yeah, she gets it. There's no way that amount in the bag can buy back her daughter. But then they fire back, screaming that they've already burned a ton of money, hunting Misha. An adult elf's eyes sparkle as she starts cheering them on, yelling that she's truly thankful from the bottom of her heart because they saved the most precious thing she has, so they push her to thank them the right way. She says that a bag of cash like this is more than enough to fuel her heartfelt gratitude. And the guy agrees, thrilled they finally got to meet Misha. A young man and his loyal companion step up to a small family and start saying their goodbyes, telling them they'll miss the elf and her daughter. Then Clarisse smiles and swears they'll meet again someday, no doubt about it. Sasha and Misha take turns staring at the travelers, gratitude shining in their eyes as they speak their final goodbyes. The carriage lurches into motion, rolling farther and farther down the street until it's swallowed by distance, and the family keeps yelling, "Thank you!" One last time, then the whole thing vanishes over the horizon. The girl and the young man keep rolling forward, tearing out of that fortress-walled city behind them, then pressing on until another one finally comes into view. A pair of travelers push into a ramshackle 2-story wooden hotel on a busy city street, then turn to the owner and demand, "Do you have 2 spare rooms in your place?" After a heartbeat, Clarice, without even thinking, snatches Mars by the sleeve and blurts out that she wants to kick off a conversation. His little companion lets out a bashful huff, keeps talking anyway, and asks if they can finally sleep in the same room tonight. The girl meets her friend's eyes and smirks, saying the beds in each room are separate anyway, so there's nothing to be embarrassed about, while the guy is left absolutely stunned by the offer. After the journey, the heroes are already back in the rented room, sprawled on separate beds, but the tension hangs in the air as if they can't quite relax sitting that close. To save the moment, the guy tries to calm everything down and tells his girlfriend to hit the bathroom first, but she shoots back that she's been bathing forever, so she insists Mars should go first. The young man starts bickering with Clarice, insisting he's a gentleman, so she should let the lady pass, but then his girlfriend snaps back that anyone who calls themselves a gentleman feels weirdly suspicious. Their conversation strikes a nerve, both of them burst into laughter, and that thick, awkward tension that hung in the air between them starts melting away right there. Clarice is in the bathroom when it finally hits her somehow. Her and Mars ended up in the very same room. She looks up, cheeks burning, convinced nothing can happen because, hey, their beds are totally different. The girl suddenly pops up and blurts out her pitch, insisting that if she ever got kidnapped again, she'd be terrified, so she'd rather be safer together. And besides, sharing one room is way cheaper than renting separate. After a few minutes, the girl finally melts into the hot tub and lets the heat swallow her stress. Then her mind clicks. She decides she wants to get closer to the main character, and meanwhile he's in the room, waiting on his girlfriend, quietly studying the stone. The young man spots his crystal lighting up, and pure shock hits him. He rockets upright on the bed, because he knows that if the stone is glowing, his family is close by. The young man pounds the closed bathroom door and yells that he's stepping out for a bit, because it looks like someone from his family is close by. Clarice snaps up out of her daydream in the bathroom and tells her friend to stop. She needs a second, and she'll be back fast. Ignoring his best friend's words, he bursts out of the hotel, hits the street, and sprints off in a direction he doesn't even recognize, convinced someone from that family is finally here to pick him up. But his mind can't stop guessing who. Right ahead, the main character spots his father and brother, and they're the ones holding the crystal, glowing with it too, while shock hits their faces like a lightning strike. The man and the boy called over just a moment ago by the young man start sprinting toward him, and he races right back to meet them the next second. The whole family is locked in a tight, shaking embrace. Plopped at a tavern table, Clarice introduces herself to her friend's family first name, last name, and all then lights up and tells them how thrilled she is to finally meet them. The main character's father leans in and declares, "I'm Zeke Bryant," then says he read all about the traveler in his son's letters, while the kid sitting beside him blurts out, "No, I'm Mars's brother Ike." The heroes sprawled into their seats, and not long after, their food finally arrived. Kebab Zeke waved everyone over to the table and basically promised, "Sit down, dig in, and let's talk right here, right now." A young guy and his girlfriend sit side by side, stuffing both cheeks as they chow down on food their guy's father ordered, while he keeps stealing sips from a chunky wooden mug like it's pure victory. Right after the company dug in, the table turned into a war room. Everyone started trading stories about the roadblocks they faced, from that brutal run-in with the infernal snake in the Forest of Demons to what happened with Misha and Sasha. And then they dove into the chaos of the auction. Zeke's face lights up with excitement and shock at once, because he can't believe the heroes somehow pulled off everything on their own. Then he turns and proudly declares that his son is doing great. Once the heroes finished stuffing themselves at the table, they climbed into the carriage that belonged to the young man's family. Then his father scanned everything and snapped, asking if they'd grabbed every last thing before they stormed out of the tavern. Mars, his brother, and the girl who's been tagging along sit on the cart floor and shout that they've got everything they need. Then an adult man yanks the reins and tells them, "We're heading home." The cart crept through the gate toward the city's exit, and the heroes crossed fields and bridges until the dark, looming castle finally came into view. The family and Clarice had been stuck on the road for ages, surviving every monster that jumped out at them because every time a girl with a bow tore one down, the second it was over, everyone cheered her name. And, during their stops, the young sorceress rushed to the horse's side because after that non-stop pace and brutal long ride, it was ready to collapse, until her magic healed it up and they could hit the road again. As the wagon rumbled across the plains, the fortress walls suddenly rose up ahead, right around the city, and the heroes hauled it through the gates, then tore onward through the settlement streets. Once the travelers finally hit their destination, the cart screeched to a halt, and the adult man panted that they were here, the exact place they'd been chasing. The girl and boy spilled out of the carriage, and right there, looming ahead, stood a massive 2-story house. The guy stepped up and told them they'd come to see him, then leaned in and told Clarice not to feel awkward for a second. 2 travelers spotted a woman on the porch, her face lit up with joyful shock, tears shining in her eyes, and right behind her, a little girl stood there too, wearing the exact same happiness. Mars and his buddy still hung back, refusing to move toward the house. Then the guy suddenly snapped, bolted to the woman waiting on the doorstep, and she hurried right at him, shouting his name. She clings to the young man, squeezing him tight, and he buries his face into her chest like he's relieved to finally have her near again. Her cheeks burn with embarrassment as she blurts out that she's so happy he's back. Still caught in her arms, he finally murmurs, "I'm home," then rushes to apologize for scaring her while a little girl clings to his legs from behind, hugging him tight. The little girl blurts out that she's over the moon. Her brother is finally back, and he laughs that, yeah, he's home, and then adds that his little sister has grown up way more while he was gone. She finally loosens her grip on her son, snaps her hands once, and turns to the girl who's been quietly watching this whole family, asking, "Are you Clarice?" Then she introduces herself and drops the bomb. "I'm Maria, I'm Mars's mother." The young sorceress dips down like she's about to curtsy, then sits back with a sly little bow, cheerfully saying she's thrilled to meet you, and offering her name. The hero's mother copies the gesture and proudly notes that the girl has impeccable manners. Late afternoon hits and the whole family crowds around the dinner table. Then the dads and the little girl lift their glasses, cheers erupting for Mars's homecoming. And they toast Clarice too, practically beaming that they're thrilled to see her. The main character and his loyal companion, who had to ditch her own family just to travel, sit right at the head of the table, lift their mugs, and with bright, embarrassed cheeks, they sincerely thank the family for the warmest welcome. As soon as the family meal wraps up, everyone's still stuck at the table, and the head of the household stands up to ask his wife to help Clarice settle in at home. She agrees right away, and Clarice turns to her and thanks her for the kindness. Maria grins and tells everyone that at first the young sorceress might feel wildly out of place, so don't expect it to click right away. But trust her, it'll all settle into place fast. And the girl herself insists, "I'm fine," like it doesn't bother her at all. Suddenly, his sister marches up to the main character's girlfriend and beams, saying how thrilled she is to meet him. The girl props her folded hands on the bench where a pair of travelers sit, rests her head there, and listens as the sister replies that her happiness is just as real. Later on, it clicks. Lena is totally smitten with Clarice. They stick together, splash through a fun bath like it's the best day ever, and once the laughter dies down, they climb into bed side by side. Ike, his brother, stuck to his studies so hard, he barely even looked at the guest, while the young man busied himself helping his father with the work. And, before they knew it, a whole month had vanished in that non-stop routine. Count Carmel hands the main character a mission wipe, the Almeria maze clean of monsters, and the young man, along with his companion and his older brother, can't wait to dive in. Touching down in Almeria, the travelers cram into a line and wait to get their entrance pass for the maze. Suddenly, the heroes are hailed by a man towering over them twice as tall, and he demands to know where the young one got that gear, claiming he's too young to wield a weapon that good, and then straight up accuses him of stealing it. Rage burns in his eyes as he snaps that he and his partner grabbed their gear from the chests inside the maze, because being accused of theft like that is a filthy lie. The man stares at the guy in total disbelief, jabs his thumb at himself, and dares the young man to put that amazing weapon skill to the test. The crowd finally breaks apart, and right in the middle, bam, a tight little circle forms around the heroes, with the main character facing the guy who just challenged him. The challenger smirks and says, "If you're not strong enough, I'm taking your gear." The fight erupts out of nowhere, then shuts off just as fast when the young man snaps forward into a lunge and drives his sword straight into the other man's face, knocking him out cold. A man sprawls on the stone tile floor, arms flung wide, unconscious, while his companions creep up behind the hero. Then the whole crowd erupts with one question: what on earth is happening here? People part ways so a handsome man can slip through, and with this unnerving calm, he says he's thrilled to finally meet Mars and his brother, because it's been ages since they've seen each other. Then he turns and asks how their father's doing. The Bryant family's eldest son steps up, bows to the old man, and tells him their father sent them to wipe out the monsters lurking in the maze. After that, whispers ripple through the crowd as people huddle and wonder if this kid really belongs to the Count's family, and they're not even surprised he crushed a man that easily right then. The guy shoves a paper forward, claiming it's from his father. A longtime friend of the Bryants pulls the heroes aside and thanks them over and over for agreeing to clear the maze, and the travelers nod politely, accepting his gratitude with respect. Before they even realize it, the adventurers finally stumble up to a towering entrance guarding the maze, and the second they step inside, silver bird machines tear across the ceiling, then swoop down and start attacking. His brother blurts that these silver birds are D-rank monsters, so he snaps his brother and girlfriend into action, and the company locks in a combat stance, eyes sharp, not letting up for a second. A brutal massacre erupts. Watch Ike whip his spear through the air to skewer birds, while Mars blasts monsters with magic, and Clarice rains down precise death with her bow and arrow. When the dust finally settles, the heroes scramble to catch their breath. Then boom! A towering mountain of magic stones materializes right in front of them, and they stare in disbelief, already arguing over how on earth they're supposed to carry them all. After the brutal ordeal, the whole crew agrees no hard feelings to head back home, and the main character's older brother steps up and promises he'll talk to their dad about what to do with all that loot. When the heroes finally drag themselves back home and spill everything about the maze, the family's leader snaps that the real problem is simple. There are just too many magic stones to grab them all, and then, without missing a beat, announces they're buying a slave next. Cal Bryant's savage offer shocks all three travelers as soon as they roll back to the mission. A group of young workers, led by the head of Bryant House, storms into a place where people can be bought, and the seller immediately asks if they need someone with blazing dexterity and brute strength as a porter, then slides a slave right into their hands. After the seller finally says the main character's father isn't against his plan, he grins, then tells them to follow him. Everyone strolls through a massive 3-floor hall like it's no big deal, and on every level there are animal people everywhere, and the guys can't help but stare, because they've never seen a place like this in their lives. The slaves huddled outside their rooms, bent over the fence rails, and stared intensely at the 4-person delegation marching toward them. The young one's father clocks it instantly. Everyone who stares at them looks nervous as hell, and the seller explains why beastmen don't recognize anyone as their masters, so their faces never show a shred of approval. The company marches up to a monstrous door, packed with 2 horizontal cutouts, and an adult man realizes every room behind it is different sizes. Meanwhile, the main character creeps closer, eyes locked on a tiny crack he's desperate to peer through. Peering into the room, Mars spots a blond man lounging on the carpet. All relaxed, he leans on a lion while a tiny bow dangles from his ear. Turns out that friendly guy is none other than one of the 12 dukes from the old alliance, Dukes Errands, and he's here as the Beastman's representative. The seller claims the man was kicked out because of a coup, and then Count Carmel snapped him up and resold him for an insane price. Sure, the Duke had paid for him, but the Duke also swore he wouldn't bow to anyone weaker than him. The young man keeps staring at the Duke's laid-back pose, and then, right when curiosity sparks, he taps his heavenly eye to uncover every last possibility hiding in that moment. The Beastman's rep spots that someone's watching him like a hawk, hates it, storms over to the door with pure fury, and swings at the main character, leaving him stunned. The Duke's punch is absolute violence. One strike and the door of his prison bursts apart, blasting the young man backward as shards of wood and splinters explode through the air. Realizing he has to protect everyone he loves, he, while still soaring, uses his magic to blast his family, his girlfriend, and even the merchant out of the angry man's reach. As the main character keeps blasting through his escape, the Duke starts backing out of the room, all stiff tension and tight, guarded moves, and while that chaos unfolds, the young man finally digs in and unleashes his clairvoyance. Right after the spell hits, the young man snaps into focus. His opponent's hand is about to slam into his face, and there's no time left to dodge. So he braces, only to hear his girlfriend throw up a barrier at the last second. An exiled beastman rep kicked out of his kingdom starts smashing his power into the barrier with his bare fists, while the girl strains with everything she's got to hold it back. And the young man instantly knows if that hit lands on him right now, his partner is finished. Once the barrier finally shatters, the young man snaps his magic into action. His spell crackles like lightning, detonating through the fist, then surging up the arm and exploding across his opponent's whole body. The boy unleashes witchcraft so viciously powerful that it shocks the seller, his whole family, and every slave crammed in to watch the massacre. Yet the Duke, spellbound and under magic's sway, is the most dazzled of all. The guy stares at his own hands like they betrayed him. He's never touched magic like this before, but it sure feels like lightning magic. Meanwhile, the Duke scrutinizes his hand, sees burn like marks, and the thing shakes uncontrollably. He gasps for breath, shocked at how hard he just blew his own magic all at once, and then he turns and demands why that guy attacked him so suddenly. The Beastman's rep stares his opponent down, says he tried to read his skills, so he went for the scare instead. Then the young man just stands there, utterly confused. With fists clenched, the main character hears those same words again, the ones he tried to study the slave without even asking, and shame hits him hard, so he drops to a perfect 90-degree bow and apologizes. Still bowed low, the young man blurts out his full name first and last, and the Duke turns to head back to his room until the guy stops him dead and asks, "Can I get your name if you don't mind?" Leo Burns introduces himself, and after only a quick chat, the young man pushes again. Does he object to the assessment? The Duke shrugs and says he doesn't care, and the guy's companions stare like they can't believe this. Calm, no drama talk. The Duke halts right in front of the main character, acting like he's generously letting him test his limits, and the young man can't believe it. His power, agility, and flexibility skills are unreal. The Beastman rep leans in and asks if the main character is finally done with the ability reading spell, wearing a totally emotionless face. Mars tells the Duke he just battled with that they're searching for a slave, then just waits, calm as can be, for his answer. He whips his gaze back to the young man, fury blazing in his eyes, and growls that he won't follow anyone weaker than him and he's not going anywhere without his loyal pet by his side. Saren reported that after a fight that pretty, the guy, maybe even the host, might have been tempted by someone new, and right then, voices erupted from every direction. The other slaves standing on their spots and watching everything unfold rattle out that this guy is incredible, that he's pure fire, and they beg him to be their master, which makes that young man's face break into a grin. The main character snaps his head up and bellows at the slaves, "Can I look at you all?" And of course they nod along while the merchant just stares in awe, thinking Mars is seriously badass. The main character's dad, the head of the Bryant family, steps in and snaps, "Are you all okay? Did any of you get hurt?" And the guys answer fast, "We're good. Not a single one of us took a hit." At the Beastman's sale, the guests get to pick only 5 slaves from the whole pile, and right there, standing before them, are the Black Wolf brothers Mac, Guy, and the third brother, with Oru, the youngest, bringing up the rear. 2 girls were picked alongside the men, Ray and Misa, who bowed sweetly and said she was thrilled to meet them, while the second girl smiled and promised she'd be happy to serve these gentlemen too. The brother's father steps up before the slaves picked for the house, then for the brutal job of hauling every jewel out of the maze, and shouts at them to come with him. The company shows up right beside a jaw-dropping 3-story mansion one Zeke Bryant rented to give all the new people they'd gathered for their ministry a place to live. A door swings open in front of this massive company, and they rush into a dining room where the Count's clue screams one thing: eat first, then talk shop, split responsibilities, and settle in. Everyone takes their places around a massive table packed with all kinds of wild sights. A short-haired slave with black tails pinned to her head asks her new masters if they mind the servants sharing the same table. Then a voice right beside her shoots back, "Why do you think you can't eat together with people?" The girl snaps up from her seat, jabs a finger at one of the Beastmen brothers, and tells Tom right to his face that he needs to start showing way more respect. Tom freezes, totally stunned by the sudden roasting, then blurts a sharp, immediate agreement with his colleague. The master of the Bryant house just studies the chaos, grins, and declares everything's fine because, in his eyes, the new servants haven't done anything truly awful. A man snaps to his eldest son and tells him to handle the slave education problem starting tomorrow, and the kid jumps at the chance, ready to take on the task. When the heroes and the Beastmen finally finish their meal, the protagonist's father steps in and tells them it's time to start talking about exactly what those slaves were bought for, what they're supposed to do. The man kicks things off by laying down the house's #1 rule: slaves must never, ever raise a hand against their masters. No exceptions. And then Zeke drops the bombshell that they're moving in just 3 years. After the event he just mentioned kicks off, the house's head slams the plan down. He's taking 3 male beastmen with him into the dungeons, while the girls stay behind to serve at the estate. After dinner, they started spreading out through the rented house Cal Bryant had set up. Then each pair headed to their rooms because before anything started, they'd already agreed who would sleep with whom. When night finally drops, the 3-story house still glows so loud you can hear the protagonist's father inside, saying every last plan is set to start tomorrow. The 3 Beastman brothers marched into the Adventurers Guild, got their E-rank status stamped, then burst back outside and started bragging like they owned the whole town. The dark-haired guys close in on Ake, practically vibrating with excitement, and ask their master what to do next, only for the young man to smirk and say he'll hand them tasks once he watches their abilities play out. The Bryant family's eldest son drags the slaves back into the maze from earlier, and once they're trapped inside, he orders them to smash every monster in their path. The slaves in the trading house got sold to fight stone lizards, dangerous, tough, and terrifyingly built, and the house of Bryant's own servants can hold their ground too. The brothers lunge into the fight without a second thought, sprung from their spots, breaking away from their masters while Mac's face stays dead serious and Guy ends up grinning like he can't wait for what's next. Everyone gets forced to pick one creature because there are exactly 3 shell monsters, and the moment it happens, everyone snaps into a fighting stance. One of the guys sprints straight at his monster, plants himself in front of it with hard, grounded steps, lifts his fist to end it, and then smacks the lizard right in the muzzle. While the kid lies knocked out, grinning like one missed punch isn't the end, his brother is just getting warmed up, leg lifted to land the next strike. The middle brother springs upward and whips his leg forward, bam, right between the lizard's eyes, and in the instant it lands, his shoe tears off and his pant leg rips free as both spin through the air. Oru, the beastman's youngest, hooks his arms around the creature's neck and starts squeezing hard. Then, after that insane struggle, the monster finally goes limp and loses consciousness. Once the stone lizards are wiped out, the brothers hobble straight toward the main character, his own brother and the girlfriend traveling with him, while Oru clings to his back, still burned by the monster's touch, and Mac limps forward in just one shoe. Soon, the beastmen form a tight line and shout that they've wiped out every last opponent, faces lit up with pride as they brag about taking only minor hits while finishing the job clean. The 3 East-End ranked adventurers stood in front of their masters and blurted, "Tell us, did we do an awesome job?" They couldn't stop thinking about whether their hard work would finally earn them praise. The older brother of the main character smirks and grips his weapon, but then snaps that this fight is straight up wrong, and he grumbles that they couldn't handle something this easy. That comment sparks instant fury in the beastmen, because in their eyes they nailed the job, so the eldest brother demands, "Why does the master think we failed?" He whips around to his younger brother and their companion and tells them, "Before we answer the slaves' questions, we treat them first because that's what real travelers do." The girl strides up to the brothers and, starting with the oldest, unleashes healing magic that mends every last wound from their savage battle with the stone lizards. Oru, the youngest of the relatives, says the little lady is seriously fascinating. She can wield sacred magic, and he even adds that everyone who owns her seems to grow up fast, which instantly makes him wonder just how old she really is. From Clarice and Mars, a couple locks eyes with the brothers and blurts, in perfect unison, "We're 8 years old." And the slaves' faces erupt with shock. The oldest brother leans in and asks the main character's girlfriend if she really has that grown-up body, like her sacred magic somehow makes it happen. Then the other brother's storm guy snatch him into their arms and start beating him while yelling that this is how it all should be judged. The younger and middle beastmen dropped to their knees, blurted out a deep apology to Clarice, and even shoved the elder into apologizing too, only for Clarice to wave it off and say it's all good. After clearing his throat, he lets out the words the slaves are finally back to full health. Now he's ready to confront them about every mistake they made in that battle. The young man strides ahead, leaves his family and the beastman in the dust, snaps into a fighting stance, pins his spear above his head, and tells everyone, "Watch me close and careful." He pulls a sneaky move, skips the weapon entirely, and just snaps a blaze from his hand, shouting, "Fire!" And that blinding magic throws the monsters off so badly they vanish into the void. Flames keep crawling over the stone lizards. Then, just seconds later, a young man snaps his spear forward and drives it straight into one of their necks, slicing clean through. Once the first monster drops, the young man lunges at the next one and hacks its head off with a single strike. Then he whips around to the slaves and demands to know if they finally get what they did wrong. The oldest brother grins, flicks his hand right in front of his face, and lets out an awkward laugh as he blurts that they have no idea how to use sacred magic. Those words set the tone he snapped at the first son of the Bryant house, because it was clear they still didn't get what the owner was trying to teach them. This isn't about magic at all. It's about the perfect combat strategy. The young man recalls the three brothers' battle, clocking every flaw, how each one overcommitted and used too much brute force. So when they step into the maze, they'll stall hard and burn out fast, because injuries will hit them almost immediately. The young crowd leans in, listening hard as their young master finishes his speech. Then he declares that the duties are all set right, and tells the brothers to team up and fight as one. The guy waves them in, calls the grizzly over, and tells everyone he just wants one thing, to make sure the slaves fully got his message, and will do it all without anyone getting hurt. That bear's got monstrous strength and endless stamina. He swings up his giant paw to smash down, but his older brother slams the strike out of the air. While the bear's thrown off, an Oru darts in, grabs on tight, and locks it down so it can't move. The final piece of the three beastmen's victory is the middle brother. He rockets upward, tucks his leg midair, and crashes it down straight onto the grizzly's head, ending the fight in an instant. The relatives rise, stare at what they've finished, then whirl to their young master and demand, "So, how's the fight going for you? And did we handle our job right?" He raises his hand, flashes a thumbs up right in front of him, and size-ups their power in one shot so the beastmen beam like they just got the highest praise. They push deeper down the hallway, and right there, one of them yells that they've got to hit the second floor. First, slay the monsters up there, then they can finally go home. The second those guys with their slaves hit the floor above, everyone snaps to stillness in pure shock, mouths hanging open because what they see is absolutely horrifying. And every adventurer is left completely clueless about what's happening. The youngest Bryant son says he never expected to find this many insects crawling around the second floor of the maze. Then he spots the ants everywhere and instantly realizes the guild has to be warned. Danger is here. Two brothers storm up to the adventurers' guild, blurting out that something urgent just happened. Then the guild head yanks himself away from the talk and demands to know what's so damn pressing. The man steps forward and introduces his guest as Margrave Evan Sorum, and the mustachioed old man lights up, telling Mars and Ike how happy he is to finally meet them. After that quick exchange, the Count's family acquaintance leans in, taps his foot with impatience, and demands the unexpected guests get on with the news. The young man blurts out that on the second floor's maze, they uncovered a staggering swarm of insect monsters. Then the guildmaster rockets out of his seat and demands, "Are they killer ants?" And the two young adventurers are completely stunned. That man keeps blaring that the monsters he's talking about will devour everything around them. Then the more he says it, the faster they multiply. They were supposed to stay in the forest of death, but somehow they got dumped into a maze instead. An old man grumbles that if the ants keep multiplying, the maze won't stand a chance of feeding them. Then he drops his gaze, realizing he has no idea how to deal with it. Minutes drag by in painful silence. Brothers, the guild's head, and the old man who'd spoken earlier with a man connected to Count Bryant all just sit there, wordless. Suddenly, the younger one snaps his gaze up and fires a question at Mars and his older brother. "What would you do if you were me?" The boys freeze, thinking hard. Then the younger kid lifts his head and announces he's got a way out. The main character says he would have contacted 3 groups from Urguzia's ranks: Brown Shield, Blue Fangs, and Red Wings. Then this guy keeps pressing forward, talking the Beastman slaves into joining his makeshift army, and finally calling the best adventurers in the city until it all clicks into a small fighting force, ready to take on monsters. The young man sits there, boxed in by his brother and 2 adult men, and keeps laying out his plan, insisting that none of his old proposals are the final draft, because the real most important piece is still missing. With his head held high, the main character declares that Mr. Burns, who he spotted at the house where slaves are sold, must be here in this detachment. No question about it. The kid's words light a fire under the adults, so they shoot out of their seats, roaring that you can't ever give up, and that you've got to fight with everything you've got until the very end. After Ralph heard the Beastman's strength was so brutal it wrecked anyone weaker than him, he didn't hesitate. He bought the plan fast and told his team to contact Count Bryant immediately. Next morning, at the crack of dawn, a massive army forms every single person that guy named before, while the main character's mom and dad stand right in front of them and tell them to start. A whole detachment of Brown Shield, Blue Fang, and Red Wings packed into the same room, and Mars, along with his loyal buddy, watched it all unfold. While his brothers stood right there too, their dad finally pressed, asking what the Beastman decided. Evan Sorum claims nearly every Beastman slave is willing to join the fight against giant ant monsters, but the Count snaps that he couldn't even get a word in with Burns. The man whips around to face the main character, locks eyes with him, and tells him straight up that the lion hunter in the room sent him over to get him to join their plan. After a while, the young man is already planted in the doorway of Burns's cell, staring down from above as he says, "I really thought I'd never see you again."